Zan Tian stared at the shattered tombstone covered in vandalism. The only thing left untouched was a lone photograph resting on his mother's grave. As his hand brushed against the cold stone and his eyes fixed on the picture, the painful past came flooding back. The tragedy began when the head of the family married another woman and threw his ex-wife and children out onto the streets. That night, beneath a relentless storm, their mother dropped to her knees and begged for mercy, pleading for her children to be spared. The only answer she received was the cold slam of an iron gate shutting in her face. The brief hope that her former husband still had a shred of compassion vanished moments later. The gate opened once again, revealing a pack of vicious dogs unleashed against them. To give her children a chance to escape into the woods, the woman threw herself in harm's way, enduring the brutal attacks while ordering the children to run as far as they could. Although they survived, the trauma and overwhelming sense of helplessness shattered the woman's mind. Unable to face reality any longer, she jumped from the top of a building. Before taking her own life, she called Zan Tian and demanded that he take care of his younger sister. Alone and abandoned by everyone, survival became a daily nightmare. The situation reached its breaking point when a thug cornered them with a knife. The fatal strike never came because a mysterious man suddenly appeared and killed the criminal on the spot. Their salvation, however, came at a terrible price. The stranger took Zan Tian away with him, severing the last remaining ties of that broken family. 10 years passed, and the world had become a battlefield of total devastation. China's defenses had collapsed, leaving countless miles of territory overrun and entire armies slaughtered on the verge of extinction. Defeat seemed inevitable until an unstoppable force stepped onto the battlefield. Zan Tian, now a living weapon of the US military, crushed the enemy commander and wiped out entire legions with his bare hands. Commanding the overwhelming power of the earth and raging storms, he single-handedly ended the war. The boy once treated like trash had become a global legend, the undisputed king of the skies. The story then returned to the present, shattering the atmosphere of glory. Standing before his mother's vandalized grave, the god of war was interrupted by a gang of troublemakers who stormed into the cemetery, shouting threats and claiming the area was off-limits. This attack was no coincidence. The cruel markings covering the tombstone carried a clear signature, Shangguan Nailan. The name was far from unfamiliar. Nailan had once been Zan Tian's mother's most loyal friend, but their friendship had been destroyed by jealousy and resentment. The root of their conflict was Chen, a wealthy heir who had pursued Nailan before discarding her. His true target had always been the protagonist's mother, a woman of extraordinary beauty whose spirit had already been broken by life. Determined to prevent her former friend from climbing into high society through marriage, Nailan's family played dirty. They forged government documents and ordered the demolition of the last house Zan Tian's mother had left to live in. Her obsession with destroying her rival did not end there. Shangguan turned the children's lives into a living hell and was the true person responsible for driving their mother to suicide. Even after her enemy's death, she remained unsatisfied and hired assassins to eliminate the children as well. Her hatred was so twisted that she vandalized the grave with insults and stationed thugs nearby to prevent anyone from paying their respects. On the exact 10th anniversary of the tragedy, Nailan planned yet another attack on the memory of the deceased. This extreme cruelty awakened a monstrous rage inside Zan Tian. Standing motionless like a stone monument, he stared at the gang surrounding the grave. The leader stepped forward and threatened to beat him senseless if he did not leave immediately. The group was furious because Madame Chen was enjoying a luxurious birthday celebration while they were stuck doing dirty work at a cemetery. As if that wasn't insulting enough, a second thug shouted curses and spat directly onto the tombstone, causing the rest of the scum to burst into laughter. The gang leader then mocked the warrior, telling him to crawl on the ground and beg if he wanted to leave unharmed. Irritated by Zan Tian's cold and intimidating stare, the second thug crouched down and prepared to spit on the grave once again. Before anyone could even blink, the protagonist's hand crushed the thug's throat. Zan Tian lifted the heavy man with a single arm, causing the rest of the gang to stumble back in panic, screaming that he was a monster. With a merciless motion, the warrior slammed the attacker's face into the dirt and ordered him to use his own mouth to clean the filth off the tombstone. Coughing up blood, the thug begged his terrified companions for help. Without showing the slightest emotion, Zan Tian made a simple gesture, and an invisible force shattered the fallen man's knee. A scream of agony tore through the silence as the thug's leg was crushed. Without raising his voice, Zan Tian cast a deadly glare that left no room for refusal. Trembling in terror and writhing across the grass, the criminal dragged himself to the tombstone and desperately began licking away the dirt to clean the stone. Suddenly, the heavy roar of rotors filled the sky. A fleet of helicopters appeared carrying massive steel containers. In a swift maneuver, the aircraft released their cargo midair, sending the containers crashing into the ground beside the attackers with a thunderous impact. Men in tactical uniforms descended from above. Within seconds, the soldiers formed a perfect line, dropped to one knee before Zan Tian, and saluted him with absolute reverence, addressing him as Your Majesty. At a quick command, the troops opened the containers. The gleam of the cargo nearly blinded the gang. The crates were overflowing with solid gold bars. That unimaginable fortune would be used entirely to build an untouchable mausoleum. Staring at the old stained tombstone, Zan Tian remembered a conversation with his mother, who had once joked about the day he would build her a golden grave and place endless riches at her feet. The helpless boy from back then no longer existed. Standing before the monument that was about to be rebuilt, he made a brutal vow. In less than a month, he would force his enemy to crawl and beg for mercy at the edge of a grave. Panic consumed the thugs as they trembled before the warrior's terrifying aura. A single glance from Zan Tian was enough to make them slam their foreheads into the ground and confess everything through cowardly tears. The order to watch the grave and destroy it had come directly from the Chen family. The revelation completed the final piece of the puzzle. The manipulative Viper had indeed seized complete control of the enemy clan. The gang leader wore an arrogant smile, convinced that the Chen family's influence was an impenetrable shield. In his mind, the rulers of the city would never allow their watchdogs to be harmed. The illusion shattered instantly. Mocking the enemy's supposed supremacy, Zan Tian stomped firmly on the ground. The impact unleashed a deadly shockwave. One by one, the thugs around him were launched into the air and blown apart without the slightest chance to defend themselves. Terrified by the massacre, the gang leader collapsed to his knees. He cried and begged for a chance to explain himself. Cold as ice, the warrior simply replied that a king does not waste time listening to excuses. In the final second, the thug's eyes widened as he recognized the infamous god of war, but the finishing strike erased him from existence in the blink of an eye. With the area cleared, Zan Tian ordered his men to gather the old stained tombstone and handed it over to Tank, his loyal subordinate. That day happened to be Nalan's birthday, and also a grand celebration for the Chen clan. The plan was simple: crash the party and return the stone as a special gift. The imported luxury car came to a stop in front of the magnificent Tiandu Hotel. As he stepped out, the protagonist stared at the lavish building that had been constructed on the exact spot where his old home once stood. Tank offered to handle the dirty work himself and spare his master the trouble, but the offer was immediately rejected. Zan Tian wanted to personally send that entire pack of scum straight to hell. Carrying the tombstone on his shoulders, Zan Tian marched into the hotel. His overwhelming presence froze the entire hallway, leaving everyone stunned by the sheer authority he radiated. Without saying a word, he slammed the massive stone onto a table, pulled up a chair, and casually sipped a glass of red wine while waiting for the chaos to begin. The peace inside the banquet hall was shattered when a squad of security guards stormed into the room. The head of security marched straight to the table to confront the intruder. The hotel's rules were absolute. No one entered without passing through reception, especially not during wealthy magnate Chen's lavish engagement ceremony. The guest list was personally overseen by Nalan, and the guard was furious to see some nobody bypassing the event's security. Demanding an invitation at the top of his lungs, the security chief noticed the mysterious object resting on the table. He reached out to pull away the cloth and inspect it, but was stopped instantly. With unbelievable speed, Zan Tian used his wooden chopsticks to pin the man's wrist in place. Cold as ever, the warrior declared that a worm had no right to see the object, because the surprise was meant exclusively for Nalan. Hearing his boss's name spoken with such contempt instantly blinded the security chief with rage. He ordered his men to uncover the package and tried to free his hand by force, pulling with all his strength. The effort was completely useless. The grip of the chopsticks felt like a steel claw. The humiliation reached its peak when Zan Tian simply released the pressure. The sudden momentum sent the chief flying backward through the air, launching him straight into a nearby table. The impact buried him beneath shattered dishes and a shower of red wine. With the trash taken out, the warrior casually tossed the chopsticks onto the floor. From the luxurious mezzanine above, the commotion was being observed by Chen Heading, heir of the clan, and the family's supreme leader, Mogan. The younger man showed curiosity about the intruder, but the patriarch merely laughed arrogantly, claiming he could erase the boy with a single move. In a mocking tone, Heading reminded him that plenty of fools had tried to avenge the dead woman in the past, and all of them were now feeding fish at the bottom of the ocean. Down below, the atmosphere exploded into open warfare. Furious over their leader's defeat, the entire army of security guards charged forward to crush Zhan Tian. The disturbance caught the attention of Zhang Wei, the hotel's public relations manager. Hoping to suppress the incident before the engagement ceremony began, she adopted a calculated and hypocritical attitude. She approached the intruder, placed a hand on his shoulder, and used every ounce of fake kindness she could muster to find out what was hidden beneath the package. To Zhan Tian, she was nothing more than a pointless distraction. Having no patience for games, he immediately brushed her aside and demanded that the true culprit behind everything, Nalan, be brought before him. The rejection shattered the woman's friendly mask, filling her with resentment and humiliation. The situation became an even bigger circus when Cao Mao, one of the hotel's owners, decided to play the hero. Outraged by the young man's audacity, the wealthy businessman punched his own head of security in the face, blaming him for allowing some nobody to cause trouble. Seizing the opportunity, the manager forced out a stream of crocodile tears and claimed she had been insulted in an unforgivable manner. Falling for the act completely, the rich owner screamed at Zhan Tian to get on his knees and beg the woman for forgiveness. The threat went in one ear and out the other. The protagonist's mind was somewhere else entirely. Looking around at all the luxury only reminded him of the old backyard that had once stood there. He remembered playing tag with his sister and hearing his mother's voice calling them inside for lunch. The nostalgia tightened around his chest before slowly transforming into a dark and deadly hatred. Realizing he was being completely ignored, the hotel owner finally lost the last shred of self-control. Wearing a sadistic grin, he unleashed his guard dogs and ordered the entire security team to crush the intruder. The horde of guards charged forward with murderous intent, leaving the guests around them frozen in shock as they waited for the inevitable bloodbath. While the guests were torn between fear and anticipation, Zhan Tian ignored the tension entirely and calmly enjoyed his wine. The head of security rushed forward wielding a massive iron baton, his favorite weapon for breaking bones and inflicting maximum pain. Certain that the intruder would be reduced to dust, the hotel owner attempted to escort the manager away from the hall to spare her from witnessing the carnage. The illusion collapsed in a fraction of a second. With superhuman reflexes, the warrior dodged the strike, lifted the heavy tombstone, and slammed it into the floor with overwhelming fury. The impact unleashed a devastating shockwave. Furniture shattered, chandeliers crashed from the ceiling, and the entire horde of security guards was blasted through the air. The private army fell unconscious, coughing blood, and completely defeated. The women nearby stood frozen between shock and fascination. High above on the mezzanine, the mood shifted instantly. The Chen clan heir recognized the lethal danger and warned the patriarch. Mogan swallowed his former arrogance and admitted that the intruder was an extremely dangerous threat. Intrigued by the destructive stone, the younger man pulled up a chair and settled in to enjoy the spectacle. Downstairs, the hotel owner froze in terror as he watched his guard dogs get crushed. Zhan Tian sat back at the table as if nothing had happened, took another sip of wine, and ordered the businessman to come closer. Trembling uncontrollably, the wealthy man tried to use the Chen family's influence as a shield. He warned that Nalan was already on her way, and that opposing her was equivalent to suicide, since all of her enemies eventually died in carefully staged accidents. The threatening warning earned nothing more than a cold laugh from the protagonist. Out of options and desperate to buy time, the businessman retreated and waited for his boss to arrive. The hotel owner's hope for salvation turned to dust in the blink of an eye. With a sudden motion, Zhan Tian hurled the massive tombstone so that it landed just inches from his feet. The thunderous impact nearly made the rich man faint from terror. Seeing the pure malice hidden behind the businessman's eyes, the warrior immediately pronounced his death sentence. Desperate, the man dropped to his knees. He attempted to bluff, shouting that any damage to Chen family property would result in unimaginable torture. The threat was silenced by Zhan Tian's ruthless stomp, which smashed the man's face against the floor. Through tears and agony, he screamed for help. The commotion was enough to draw the clan heir downstairs, heavily escorted by bodyguards and Master Mogan himself. The manager ran over to her superiors in tears, accusing the intruder of brutally assaulting her boss. Believing he was now protected by the arrival of the clan leadership, the man lying on the floor flashed a sadistic grin and ordered the intruder to beg for forgiveness. The response was a lethal kick that tore his head clean off. Without the slightest reaction, Zan Tian stepped over the corpse, locked eyes with the enemy heir, and sarcastically asked if he had anything to say. The gruesome display nearly caused the clan leader's legs to give out beneath him. Taking control of the situation, the elderly Mogan steadied the frightened heir. Wearing an arrogant expression, the veteran sized up the intruder from head to toe and loudly boasted that the young man was tough enough to survive, at most, 10 of his deadly strikes. The crowd was impressed by the old master's unwavering confidence. Sensing the danger, Mogan attempted one final tactic, a deal. If Zan Tian survived his attack, he would be allowed to leave freely. The audience of loyal followers sighed in admiration, believing such an offer from a feared master was an act of pure mercy. The old man's mask of generosity shattered the moment Zan Tian mentioned the cemetery, the vandalized grave, and the lackeys Mogan had sent to desecrate his mother's tomb. The shock on the master's face was immediate. When he ordered someone to contact his men, Zan Tian calmly answered that there was nobody left to pick up the phone, only cold corpses scattered across the ground. The insult made Mogan's blood boil. He demanded to know who this man really was, but Zan Tian replied that a mangy dog had no authority to question its superior. The old master's fury exploded. With a sneer, he apologized in advance for the brutality that was about to follow and launched himself at the young man while his bodyguards formed a deadly perimeter. In Mogan's hands, the air itself began to distort. A sphere of pure fire formed between his palms, crackling with destructive energy. The attack was about to be unleashed, but Zan Tian was faster. He ripped the heavy tombstone from the floor as if it weighed nothing and hurled it like a supersonic projectile. Mogan released the fireball at the exact moment the stone cut through the air. The collision was monumental. The tombstone tore straight through the flames and slammed into Mogan with the force of a freight train, launching him into the wall. The fireball, still active, ricocheted back into the master's own chest, causing him to choke on blood while being consumed by the heat of his own technique. Crumpled on the ground, gasping for breath and barely able to move, the old man struggled to comprehend what kind of monster had just dismantled his entire legacy with a single throw. Where did this monster come from? The question echoed through the room, carrying a shock that even Mogan could barely hide. Ignoring the threat completely, Zan Tian simply asked, with a twisted smile, for a glass of pomegranate juice. The memory of picking the sweet fruit with his sister in the garden under their mother's watchful eye was the only thing that mattered to him in that moment. Furious at being dismissed, the old man tried to regain his composure and spat out empty warnings. No one, not even the strongest warrior alive, should dare cross Chen Badao, the ruler of this city. The name Badao left a bitter taste of betrayal. The man who should have protected his mother, the same man who married Naylin and rose to power on the ruins of his family, was nothing but trash. Zan Tian's memories were merciless. He remembered the day Badao insulted his mother, calling her a worthless prostitute, simply because she had rejected his advances, while Naylin watched nearby with a victorious smile. Badao was not a leader. He was the architect of their entire tragedy. Mogan still tried to use his master's status as a shield, ordering the intruder to kneel. The old man's stubborn arrogance became the final trigger. Zan Tian's patience finally ran out. Without another word, he charged. The impact was far too powerful for any resistance. Mogan was launched through the hall like a rag doll before being crushed into a wall. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the strongest veteran in the room had been erased with humiliating ease. Without even glancing at the motionless body, Zan Tian turned toward the Chen heir. "Where's my pomegranate juice?" The man, pale as a corpse after witnessing his master's fate, immediately began stammering apologies and rushed off in a panic to bring the monster exactly what he had demanded. Impatient as ever, Zan Tian paid no attention to the terror around him while the city's elite gathered on the 5th floor, treating the engagement between Wen Su and Chen's nephew like a matter of national importance. With Badao and Naylin away on a trip, responsibility for overseeing the event had fallen to Shangguan Susu, Naylin's younger sister. Wen Qingshan, patriarch of the Wen family, accepted the arrangement without hesitation. His family stood on the brink of ruin after challenging powerful enemies, and this marriage was the only lifeline available. Su, the bride-to-be, remained silent, prepared to bury her dreams and sacrifice her own happiness to prevent her father from losing everything. The festive atmosphere was shattered when a panicked security guard burst into the hall with news of the massacre. Xiao Mao was dead, Mogan had been defeated, and even the Chen patriarch himself was being threatened by an unknown man. Susu's fury was immediate. She slammed her hand against the table, outraged that an intruder would dare ruin such an important event. Just as she prepared to head downstairs and handle the situation herself, when King Shan stopped her. The elderly patriarch, arrogant and completely blind to the magnitude of the danger, laughed at the report. To him, the troublemaker was nothing more than a low-level laborer unworthy of a high-ranking lady's attention. With a smug gesture, he picked up a brush and a sheet of paper, fully convinced that a simple letter from him would be enough to make the insolent fool tremble with fear and run away. Wen's assistant could barely contain his pride in the plan. Holding the letter in his hands, he headed downstairs, ready to confront the target. Upstairs, Wenjie ignored her father's warnings and decided to personally investigate the commotion below. The moment she entered the hall, every eye turned toward her. Her beauty left the men around her speechless, but Wenjie barely noticed. Her attention locked onto the silhouette of a man casually sitting in a chair. Then came the shock. The moment she recognized him, it felt as though time had rolled back 3 years. The memory was crystal clear, a business trip overseas that had turned into an ambush. Her father had been surrounded, and she had fled in desperation while armed thugs closed in from every direction. Just when all hope seemed lost, the impossible happened. A stranger appeared out of nowhere, stopping moving vehicles through sheer force alone. The savior she had never forgotten, the only man whose courage made every other man seem insignificant. Meanwhile, Chen noticed Wenjie's arrival and stood up, convinced that all of his gifts, favors, and endless flattery had finally paid off. A confident smile spread across his face. He was certain victory belonged to him. Reality hit him like a bucket of ice water. Without even sparing him a glance, Wenjie completely ignored him. In one swift motion, she crossed the room and threw herself at the man sitting in the chair, wrapping her arms around Senshin with absolute sincerity. Silence consumed the hall. The guests exchanged bewildered looks and whispered among themselves, stunned by Wenjie's devotion. Chen stood frozen in place, his face twisted with jealousy and disbelief, while Senshin finally recognized her. Their childhood friendship had a name, Wen Yosiu. While other children had kept their distance, she had always been his protector. 3 years earlier, fate had brought them together again by pure chance. Senshin, then known as Sang Wuken, had appeared when she needed help the most, saving both her and her father from a brutal attack. During that reunion, he introduced himself simply as Sang Tian, a name that felt to her like the missing piece of a puzzle. The shock of finding her childhood friend again had eventually turned into sadness over the years they had lost, but he had only laughed, treating the coincidence as undeniable proof that fate had brought them together once more. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, the atmosphere surrounding the marriage agreement remained celebratory. The room was filled with praise for Mr. Wen's calligraphy, along with jokes about how his letter had surely frightened the intruder into fleeing. With a playful grin, Shangguan remarked that the marriage would technically make her the stepmother of her own nephew, drawing laughter from everyone as they joked about the future alliance between the Wen and Chen families. The peaceful mood was abruptly shattered when a subordinate rushed into the room looking visibly shaken, still overflowing with confidence. Mr. Wen immediately assumed the message was related to his letter and ignored the desperate warnings that something outrageous was happening downstairs. He smiled proudly, expecting good news about Chen and Su's engagement. The assistant's urgency finally forced him to walk toward the balcony. The shock was immediate. The reality below was nothing like he had imagined. The same Su who was supposed to be celebrating her engagement to Chen was embracing a complete stranger, while Chen himself remained kneeling in humiliation. Mr. Wen's furious shout echoed throughout the hall. Standing just behind him, however, Shangguan watched everything unfold with a victorious smile, savoring every second of the chaos. The shock left Mr. Wen frozen in place. In his mind, the marriage had always been nothing more than a chess piece to expand his influence, but the sight of his daughter embracing a stranger below shattered every strategy he had carefully built. Standing beside him, Shangguan erupted with fury. She pointed at the scene and demanded to know how Mr. Wen could allow such a public insult to the Chen family's honor. The possibility that she had sent the letter only to create chaos instead of preventing it pounded relentlessly in Shangguan's mind. As Mr. Wen struggled to process the absurd situation, he felt that something was off. His daughter was not reckless. The tension in the air ultimately forced both of them to head downstairs in search of an explanation that could justify such humiliation. As soon as they arrived, her father loudly demanded answers. The discomfort was immediate on all sides. The moment Wenjie noticed her father's presence, she stepped away from Senshin. Then came the revelation. Without hesitation, she explained that the insolent man everyone was condemning was actually the savior who had risked his life for them years ago. Mr. Wen froze. The sleepless nights, the burden of gratitude he had carried for years, and the face he had never forgotten suddenly connected in his mind. Calm as ever, Sentian brushed off the rescue as nothing more than a simple act of kindness. The conversation naturally drifted into memories of the past, back to the days when Wen Liming, Wenjie's kind-hearted mother, welcomed the children as if they were family, surrounding them with abundant meals and the stories her father loved to tell. While nostalgia filled the air, Chen's patience finally snapped. Furious at being ignored, he stormed toward the group. He demanded an explanation, shouting for his mother and desperately trying to assert his authority. Maintaining her composure, Wenjie attempted to calm the situation, determined to end the conflict before it spiraled completely out of control. Instead, the room became a battlefield of words, poison dripping from every sentence. Shangguan insulted Wenjie, labeling her a shameless woman and demanding answers from Mr. Wen. Her arrogance went too far. Far from being submissive, Wenjie's father fired back without hesitation. Shangguan immediately responded by canceling the engagement on the spot. She demanded the return of every gift the Chen family had provided and ordered the couple to kneel before her nephew or face death. Wenjie faltered beneath the aggression, but Sentian immediately stepped forward and shielded her. Ironically, Sentian himself wanted the engagement terminated as well, though his boldness still left everyone in the room stunned. Feeling cornered, Shangguan finally called upon her ultimate weapon, Mr. Feng. Known throughout the underworld as both the Chen family's hound and its executioner, Feng descended the stairs ready to handle the matter personally. His reputation for cruelty arrived before he did. Consumed by jealousy and public humiliation, Chen ordered Feng to destroy Sentian without showing the slightest mercy. Nearby, Mogan struggled back to his feet and watched the scene unfold with a sinister grin, fully convinced that nobody could survive Feng's wrath. The assassin stopped directly in front of Sentian. Then he generously granted him 3 seconds to live before delivering the finishing blow. Chaos had completely consumed the hall. Chen continued screaming accusations at Wenjie, who remained behind Sentian's back, while everyone waited for the bloody ending promised by the Chen family's executioner. Chen's contempt was obvious. Blinded by rage over Wenjie's audacity, he demanded the immediate cancellation of the engagement. Sentian responded with chilling indifference. Ignoring the tension entirely, he casually slapped Chen across the face before once again asking, with heavy sarcasm, about the pomegranate juice he had been promised. The humiliation drove Chen into a frenzy. He immediately ordered Feng to kill him, but Sentian's patience had finally run out. The mere mention of the missing drink unleashed an oppressive aura throughout the room. Violent energy erupted from his body, transforming the entire hall into a field of crushing pressure. With a sharp motion, a violent vortex exploded outward, sending Chen flying through the air before slamming him into the ground with devastating force. Panic immediately spread through the crowd. Mogan and his guards rushed to aid the injured heir, while Shangguan continued watching with complete confidence. In her mind, Feng's superior martial power would solve everything. After all, Feng was no amateur. He served Chen Badao himself and possessed deadly techniques beyond anyone present. Feng charged forward. The floor cracked beneath his feet as he prepared to execute his target. Then everything changed. As he approached, the assassin's gaze landed on Sentian's waist. Terror replaced fury in less than a heartbeat. There, clearly visible, was the insignia of a cavalry general, the mark carried by the warriors who had annihilated their enemies at Dragon Valley. Feng, who had once attempted to join the elite ranks and failed during the very first round of selection, immediately recognized the symbol of the southern vermilion bird. The hunter suddenly understood the status of the man standing before him, and with that realization came the crushing weight of his own insignificance. Every trace of Feng's arrogance vanished instantly. The so-called executioner launched his attack with a mocking sneer, but the moment he recognized the southern vermilion bird emblem, the exclusive insignia of Emperor Zhan, absolute terror seized his entire body. The strike that should have been fatal never landed. A dome of blue energy appeared and effortlessly blocked the attack, a manifestation of power that only the supreme elite could wield. Feng, the feared executioner of the Chen family, completely collapsed. Dropping to his knees, he bowed his head in desperate reverence before Sentian. Chaos erupted throughout the hall. Chen and Shangguan were completely confused. They interpreted Feng's collapse as some kind of breakdown or seizure and immediately ordered doctors and guards to drag him away. But the moment someone touched him, the so-called master reacted with animalistic ferocity. He hurled a guard into the panicked crowd and delivered a brutal slap that sent Chen crashing to the floor in a daze. Feng saw what the others could not. He understood the magnitude of the fatal mistake committed by the Shangguan family in Chen Badao when they chose to challenge someone of Sentien's caliber. As Chen's humiliation deepened, Shangguan Susu attempted to intervene, completely unaware that Feng's aggression was not madness, but the paralyzing fear of a man who had recognized a god among mortals. The situation spiraled completely out of control, and the fate of everyone who had dared insult Sentien was already sealed by a terror they could not even begin to comprehend. The entire scene became a nightmare for the Shangguan family. Realizing that their ignorance would drag him down alongside them, Master Feng did not hesitate. When Shangguan tried to curse and insult him, punishment came instantly. A savage slap sent her flying across tables and shattered dishes. Her attempt to unleash guards against Feng only accelerated her own downfall. To Feng, the entire family was nothing more than a swarm of insects standing before the emperor's authority. Every action he took was driven by desperation, a frantic attempt to erase his own guilt through violent submission. The terror reached its peak when the roar of a tank-like engine thundered through the building. Sentien's bodyguard, a colossal figure, stormed into the hall. With frightening ease, he grabbed Shangguan by the leg as if she were nothing more than a discarded object. Disrespect toward the emperor could not be forgiven. He slammed her into the ground with overwhelming force, causing the entire structure to tremble. It seemed as though her soul had already left her body after the first impact, yet he lifted her once more and delivered a second devastating slam, leaving her broken, bleeding and writhing on the floor. The final blow came in the form of a gigantic hammer wielded by the bodyguard. The impact shattered not only Shangguan but every last trace of authority her family still possessed. Once the execution was complete, the giant turned towards Sentien and reported that his troops had surrounded the entire perimeter. Unshaken as always, Sentien merely instructed him to keep his excessive anger under control. The bodyguard then delivered an icy ultimatum to everyone present. Anyone still standing when he finished counting would feel the weight of his hammer. The entire hall immediately dropped to its knees. Fear paralyzed every person beneath the shadow of imminent death. Mogan watched everything unfold in stunned silence. Completely overwhelmed by the absolute authority radiating from Sentien, panic spread everywhere. Guests and family members alike crawled across the floor, begging for forgiveness. Chen wasted no time. The moment he received Sentien's order regarding the pomegranate, he did far more than simply bring the fruit. In a desperate attempt to appease him, he personally carried an entire pomegranate tree in a decorative pot and offered it like a sacred tribute. Sentien accepted the gift. He decided it would make a nice present for his younger sister. The oppressive atmosphere shifted when Sentien ordered Chen to deliver a message to his mother, tell her that he would be returning soon. To seal the promise, he hurled a tombstone at the man. The impact was devastating. Chen's legs were shattered as the stone exploded upon impact, sending dust and debris billowing into the air. Even while drawing her final breaths, Shangguan stubbornly clung to her arrogance. She threatened Sentien with the future return of her son-in-law. Disappointed by the mediocrity of his opponents, who had not even bothered to bring the Heavenly King into the confrontation, Sentien ended her life with a precise strike to the face. With the matter settled, Sentien and his bodyguard left the hall. As their vehicle drove away, the focus shifted toward the future. Thanks to the information he had gathered, Sentien had finally uncovered the truth about his younger sister. After her aunt failed to protect her from Sangguan Jin's reach, the girl had been sent to an orphanage. Later, she adopted a new name, Long Jiadeng. Now she had become one of the brightest students at Hedong Academy, standing at the very top of the academic rankings. The search was finally over, but Sentien's next journey was only beginning. He waited quietly inside his car parked outside the school. In his mind, he could only remember the little sister he had left behind, a sweet, innocent girl fascinated by the world around her. Deep down, he hoped that time had not changed her too much. The peaceful atmosphere, however, was shattered by a gang lurking around the school's entrance. The thugs casually discussed the target of the day, the most popular and beautiful girl at the academy, who had become their boss's latest obsession. The leader of the street gang quickly cut off the idle chatter and focused on the plan. Knowing the student would never willingly pay attention to their boss, the mission was simple. Monitor her after school, follow her along a route they had already mapped out, corner her somewhere isolated, and take her by force. To make it clear that failure would not be tolerated, the leader delivered a brutal punch to one of his own men. This kidnapping was the gang's golden ticket. Their boss had promised to erase all their debts and reward them with a fortune if the job was completed, leaving the leader willing to crush anyone who got in his way. Concerned about potential witnesses, the gang leader noticed a car parked nearby and sent one of his men to chase it off. The thug walked up to the vehicle and aggressively ordered its occupant to move out of the gang's way. The response from inside the car instantly changed the atmosphere. Cold and completely unfazed, the man simply demanded that the thug serve him a cup of tea. The message behind those words was unmistakable. This was the criminal's only chance to walk away alive because he had no intention of allowing trash like them to commit crimes in broad daylight. The thug froze at such outrageous confidence and hurried back to report the demand to his superior. Finding the situation amusing and fully confident in his own strength, the gang leader approached the vehicle with a sadistic grin, announcing that he would personally make sure the stranger received a very special cup of tea. The air grew heavy and oppressive. Near the vehicle, the gang leader openly acted with complete disrespect, performing a crude gesture over a container while his companions laughed and mocked the situation. Meanwhile, the school day was nearing its end, and the flow of students gathering near the gates steadily increased. Inside the car, Zan Tian continued analyzing the information he had gathered. His investigation pointed toward the southern district of the city. The address where his aunt had once lived had disappeared from official records 2 years earlier after the property was demolished, leaving her whereabouts completely unknown. The mood darkened when the gang leader, irritated that he had not received the reaction he expected for his so-called tea service, noticed the real target emerging from the crowd. Ashwan had finally appeared. She was surrounded by classmates who thanked her for helping them with their studies. The girls barely had time to discuss their lessons before the group of boys who had been watching them for days stepped forward and blocked their path. Ashwan's friends immediately sensed the danger and suggested calling a teacher at once, alarmed by the aggressive attitude of the delinquents. Nearby students whispered among themselves, outraged that the harassment seemed to be directed exclusively at Ashwan. The tension exploded when the gang leader stepped forward. Mockery dripped from every word as he aggressively invited her to get into the car. Before the intimidation could escalate any further, several male students nearby stepped in, attempting to protect the girl and keep the situation under control within school grounds. The gang's audacity knew no limits. In broad daylight, the leader resorted to violence, striking one of the students and openly challenging anyone who tried to stop him. The scene descended into chaos as the thug continued threatening Ashwan and demanding her obedience. He reached toward her, attempting to corner her with nowhere to run. Then everything changed. The roar of an engine cut through the air. A woman sped onto the scene aboard a motorcycle and positioned herself directly between Ashwan and the attackers. With unquestionable authority, she ordered the girl to get on the back of the bike. Ashwan recognized her immediately, Master Shia. Within seconds, the two sped away, leaving the stunned gang members behind, too shocked to react as the motorcycle disappeared into the distance. Kao, one of the gang members, questioned why his older brother had not immediately started a pursuit. The only answer he received was a frustrated punch. The leader, fully aware of the obvious disadvantage, had no interest in wasting time on pointless anger. He knew the girl's routine and her connections. He knew Ashwan's adoptive father operated a small food stand in the old district. Certain that the two women would seek shelter and food there, he quickly mapped out the next phase of the hunt. Meanwhile, Zan Tian silently observed everything from inside his vehicle. The gang prepared for what they believed would be the final confrontation. None of them realized that by heading to that location, they were digging their own graves. Ashwan and Master Shia arrived at their destination without incident. Reuniting with her adoptive father, Long Duong, Ashwan found him completely focused on work. He greeted her with a stern scolding for returning so late from school. Long Duong barely gave her time to explain. Despite his irritation, he noticed Master Shia's presence and immediately displayed his usual hospitality by offering her a plate of freshly roasted lamb. Shia politely declined, claiming she was in a hurry, but the man insisted, explaining that it was a special day. Worried about causing her father more stress, Ashwan quietly asked her teacher to keep the trouble at school a secret. The atmosphere shifted when Long Duong brought a cake to the table and revealed that it was Ashwan's birthday. Caught by surprise, Master Shia immediately offered her congratulations. With a guilty expression, Long Duong apologized for the simplicity of the celebration and promised to work harder so he could give her better gifts in the future. Visibly moved, Ashwan fought back tears and assured him that spending time together was all she truly needed. Encouraged by Master Shia, Ashwan closed her eyes and made 3 wishes. The first was for her parents' health. The second was to make her late mother proud. The third was for the brother she had not seen in 10 years. She wished for them to reunite someday and hoped he was safe, warm, and protected from whatever hardships life had thrown at him. The peaceful moment was abruptly shattered by the screech of tires. A vehicle belonging to the gang came to a stop directly in front of the food stand. Without the slightest courtesy, the gang leader stepped out, marched inside, and casually crushed Ashwan's birthday cake with his hand. He tasted a piece, made a disgusted face, and spat it onto the ground, angrily insulting the quality of the food. Then the violence began. With a burst of rage, the thug flipped the table, sending food and dishes flying everywhere. Long Duong became the target of relentless mockery because of his financial situation. Master Xia immediately stepped between the criminals and her student, attempting to shield Ashwan from danger, but the gang leader merely stared back with a cruel smile. There was not the slightest sign of retreat. The tension inside the food stand reached its breaking point. Driven by twisted arrogance, the gang leader viewed Master Xia's resistance as an entertaining challenge. His response was a violent slap across her face. Acting as though they owned the entire neighborhood, the gang forced their way in. The leader demanded to be served food on the spot, turning the humiliation into a spectacle as he and his men feasted on whatever remained. Overwhelmed by guilt, Ashwan tried to take responsibility for the nightmare unfolding around her. Long Duong immediately stepped in front of her. Standing firm, he promised that no harm would come to his daughter while she remained under his protection. He revealed that he had already contacted an old ally, Daiki's brother, believing that connections from the past would still command respect. Not long afterward, an intimidating man arrived. Hoping for a peaceful solution, Long Duong offered him money to settle the conflict. The newcomer, however, was in no hurry. Before discussing anything, he demanded a meal. While Ashwan's father returned to the grill, the gangsters occupied the stand with complete disrespect. Then came the final proposal. The thug offered a reduction in the neighborhood's protection fees, but only if Ashwan was delivered to Boss Puso that very night. As he spoke, he drew a knife. The threat could not have been clearer. Trying desperately to remain calm, Long Duong argued that his daughter was nothing more than a student to child. The response was immediate. Another brutal punch smashed into his face, silencing any attempt at reason. The insult directed at Ashwan's father finally triggered an explosion of suppressed rage. Even after being restrained and forced to his knees by the gang members, he roared that none of them would ever lay a hand on his daughter while he was still alive. The humiliation continued. The gang leader spat directly into his face and mocked his helplessness before the overwhelming power of Boss Puso and his organization. Then chaos erupted. In a desperate burst of determination, Long Duong broke free and knocked one of the attackers to the ground. Armed with nothing but a folding chair, he began swinging at anyone who came near, throwing punches fueled by pure desperation. Blood soon stained the ground, but the gang's overwhelming numbers quickly took their toll. Before long, Long Duong was subdued once again. Ashwan screamed and begged for her father's life, while the terrified crowd could do nothing but watch. No one dared interfere within territory controlled by those criminals. The course of the story changed with the sound of a violent collision. Zan Tian arrived on the scene, ramming his vehicle directly into the car belonging to the gang leader, Lao Hu. He stepped out of the wrecked vehicle and calmly walked toward the conflict with a presence so overwhelming that silence immediately fell over the area. In a cold voice, he condemned the thugs for their cowardice in targeting an elderly man and a young girl. Zan Tian's arrival drew everyone's attention, but Ashwan felt the impact more deeply than anyone else. The moment she recognized him, disbelief gave way to a flood of emotion. Zan Tian approached her, called her little sister, and opened his arms for an embrace. Frozen in place and fighting back tears, Ashwan had to pinch her own arm just to make sure she was not dreaming. After all these years, her brother was finally standing before her. Their reunion was filled with relief and unspoken promises. Through tears, Ashwan asked whether he would leave again. Zan Tian immediately reassured her that from this day forward, nobody would ever dare bother her again. What the criminals failed to understand was Zan Tian's true identity. He was one of the deadliest commanders in the military, known throughout the world as the Heavenly Emperor, a man whose most sacred rule was the absolute protection of his family. The situation became almost surreal. Furious over the damaged vehicle, Lao Hu demanded an outrageous amount of compensation, shouting threats and insisting that Zan Tian pay for the destruction of his car. Zan Tian completely ignored him. Instead, he focused on his sister. Curious about the celebration, he asked why everyone had gathered that day. He soon learned that it was not actually Ashwan's birthday. Rather, her adoptive father commemorated the day her aunt had saved her 10 years ago, a second birthday marking the beginning of her new life. Touched by the story, Zantian presented her with a pomegranate tree. Ashuan accepted the gift with obvious delight. Meanwhile, Lao Hu's blood was boiling. Unable to tolerate being ignored, he ordered his subordinates to step forward and collect what he claimed was owed. The thug chosen for the task demanded $3 million. The absurd amount supposedly covered the damage to the vehicle and even included a separate price on Zantian's head. Without even glancing at the man, Zantian instructed Ashuan to take him to their aunt's house after he finished dealing with the trash standing in front of them. The mention of their aunt immediately darkened Ashuan's expression. She revealed that the woman had been facing serious troubles and had specifically asked everyone to keep the matter secret. Zantian told her they would deal with that later. Unfortunately, the criminal's patience had already reached its limit. The tension reached its peak when Lao Hu, unwilling to accept the humiliation, tried to belittle Zantian by calling him an arrogant nobody with no background or influence. Behind him, Ashuan trembled nervously. Zantian simply protected her with the calm confidence of a man who ruled battlefields. The first attacker, Cao, charged forward with a machete. With a precise movement, Zantian redirected the weapon with his palm and dropped the thug with a devastating elbow strike. What followed was a complete demonstration of superior skill. When another attacker swung a bat toward him, Zantian smoothly evaded the strike, drove a blow into the man's stomach, and followed with a lightning-fast counterattack. Every assault was effortlessly neutralized. Wrists were seized. Faces were snapped backward by brutal slaps. Bodies crashed to the ground one after another. Even a surprise attack from behind was defeated when Zantian performed an agile flip, leaving the attacker pinned and helpless. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he dismantled the entire gang by himself. Soaked in sweat and visibly shaken, Lao Hu desperately tried to reclaim what little authority he still possessed. He challenged Zantian to stay exactly where he was, boasting that reinforcements were on the way. More specifically, he planned to call his cousin, a man he claimed was far more dangerous than anyone present. Zantian accepted the challenge without the slightest hesitation. He remained exactly where he stood, calm and unmoved, while Lao Hu frantically searched for salvation through his phone, convinced that his relative's arrival would completely reverse the outcome of the massacre. The tension rose to a critical level. Feeling confident once more, the gang attempted to intimidate Zantian with promises that the area's true boss would soon arrive. Their demands were absolute. Ashuan would be handed over, the money would be surrendered, and Zantian would publicly humiliate himself. Long Duong, terrified and fully aware of what had happened to others who dared oppose the gang, begged Zantian to leave while he still could. He knew the cost of resistance. The former owner of a nearby cafe had challenged them once and ended up hospitalized for his efforts. Zantian, however, remained completely calm, ignoring every warning. He respectfully helped his adoptive father into a chair and assured him that the years of suffering and backbreaking labor were finally over. The criminals burst into laughter, mocking the newcomer's confidence. Zantian paid them no attention. Instead, he calmly reaffirmed who he was. He was not an ordinary man. He was the commander of thousands of elite soldiers who would cross any border, face any enemy, and sacrifice anything necessary to carry out his orders. The gang's mockery was interrupted by the roar of engines. The convoy belonging to Lao Hu's cousin, the feared Yao, surrounded the area. Feeling empowered by his boss's arrival, Lao Hu stepped forward to drag Zantian before him. What happened next shocked everyone. With a sharp, precise motion, Zantian slapped Lao Hu across the face, sending him crashing to the ground. When a second thug tried to intervene, he suffered the exact same fate. The direct confrontation was about to begin, and the criminal's arrogant confidence was rapidly giving way to genuine fear in the face of Zantian's ruthless composure. The tension in the air was unbearable. Completely oblivious to the deadly danger standing before him, Lao Hu demanded that Zantian kneel, counting down from 3 as if preparing to issue an execution order. While Ashuan and her adoptive father feared the worst, Master Xia stepped in, attempting to use her family's name to force a retreat. What she didn't realize was that Yao's influence far exceeded any protection her connections could provide. Zantian, however, remained completely unfazed. He simply thanked the teacher for always looking after his sister. When the countdown reached its climax, the outcome was the exact opposite of what everyone expected. The moment Yao locked eyes with Zantian, his face instantly turned pale. What the gang mistook for rising fury was actually pure terror. As the security manager of Hotel Tiandu, Yao immediately recognized the man standing before him. Chaos erupted shortly afterward. Trying to humiliate Zan Tian, Lao Hu approached carrying a cup filled with spit, expecting approval from his cousin. Instead, Yao answered with a savage slap that knocked Lao Hu to the ground. Without stopping, Yao began viciously beating his own relative, venting every ounce of fear and frustration onto the fools who had dragged him into what was clearly a suicidal confrontation. The other gang members immediately tried to flee after realizing the situation had completely changed. They didn't get far. Yao caught them one by one and punished them with the same brutality. The message was unmistakable. Zan Tian wasn't merely a powerful man. He was a force so terrifying that even the predators who ruled the streets begged for mercy in his presence. Yao's humiliation was complete. He bowed repeatedly before Zan Tian, desperately pleading for forgiveness while the crowd watched in stunned silence. Although impressed by the overwhelming display of power, Ashuan's adoptive father couldn't shake his growing fear. After all, Puso, the true ruler of the area, and a man backed by powerful allies, still remained a looming threat. Zan Tian, however, paid no attention to such concerns. His focus remained on punishing those responsible for traumatizing his sister. He rejected Yao's plea with complete disdain and hurled him against a wall as though he were nothing more than a discarded object. Then he turned his attention toward Cao. With Zan Tian's hand wrapped around his throat, Cao desperately tried to beg for another chance. The effort was pointless. He was tossed aside without mercy. Meanwhile, Lao Hu attempted to save himself by claiming he had merely been following Puso's orders. The excuse achieved nothing. Zan Tian grabbed Lao Hu by the hair and dragged him toward the vehicle that had been disrespected earlier. With calculated cruelty, he forced the thug to clean the filthy stain he had left on the window using his own mouth. Even when Yao attempted to intervene on behalf of his cousin, Zan Tian threw him against the vehicle's metal frame, making it crystal clear that negotiations were not an option. Under the threat of even worse punishment, Lao Hu, crying and covered in blood, had no choice but to lick the glass clean and endure the humiliating penalty. Once he was satisfied that the lesson had been learned, Zan Tian contacted one of his informants and began preparing his next move against Puso. The atmosphere was one of total submission. The young man who had once challenged Zan Tian's authority was now crawling across the ground, trembling as he desperately begged for forgiveness. Zan Tian's patience was non-existent. A single slap launched the man through the air. Afterward, the Heavenly Emperor lifted him by the throat and unleashed a barrage of strikes so fast that the eye could barely follow them. When the battered body finally crashed to the ground, another desperate apology earned nothing but another corrective blow. Then Zan Tian presented a choice. If forgiveness was to be earned, it had to be sought from the person who had actually been wronged. His face swollen beyond recognition, the young man crawled toward Ashuan's adoptive father and wrapped his arms around the older man's legs, begging for mercy. The humiliation was absolute. Seeing their leader reduced to such a pitiful state, the rest of the gang, including Lao Hu, abandoned every trace of pride. They fell to their knees, offering enormous sums of money in exchange for their freedom. Even Brother Yao, despite the brutal beating he had already received, dragged himself toward Zan Tian and desperately tried to explain that he had never intended for any of this to happen. Zan Tian's response came in the form of a non-negotiable decree. If they wished to leave alive, each of them would have to break one of their own arms. Terror spread through the group. Ignoring every plea for mercy, Zan Tian began counting down. When he reached 3, it became painfully obvious that there would be no escape. Understanding that obedience was the only path to survival, Yao took the initiative. He smashed a glass bottle against the ground and, with trembling hands, prepared to carry out the order. Faced with the certainty of death if they refused, the gang had no alternative. One after another, they grabbed whatever improvised tools they could find and reluctantly prepared to inflict the required injury upon themselves, accepting mutilation as the price of ending the nightmare. The informant did not hesitate. He drew his machete and severed his own arm as proof of loyalty. After the shocking display, Zan Tian dismissed everyone. His sister, fascinated by the authority he commanded, was ready to leave, but her teacher stopped her and insisted on having a private conversation first. The group was escorted back inside the school. Far away from the commotion, Zan Tian found himself deep in thought. Being Ian's brother required strength, but Haidon was a nest of vipers. Confronting the Chen and Pu clans now would expose Ian to deadly danger. Inside the school, the teacher warned him about exactly that. She questioned whether such a public display of power would truly have a positive effect on Eden. Zan Tian thanked her for her concern and for supporting his sister over the years, but his commanding presence left little room for further argument. The atmosphere grew tense after the teacher departed. Annoyed, the young woman went on her way. Zan Tian then returned to the home where Ian and her adoptive father lived. The sight that greeted him was heartbreaking. The conditions were miserable: bare concrete walls, rough flooring, no proper ventilation. The sister of a legendary god of war had been surviving inside a tiny, run-down shack. Ashamed of the living conditions, her adoptive father apologized repeatedly. Zan Tian, however, recognized the old man's sacrifices and efforts. The atmosphere remained cautious. Embarrassed by the lack of proper tea, Ian served hot water instead. While her adoptive father stepped away to wash clothes, the siblings, separated for an entire decade, were finally left alone. Before the old man could leave completely, Zan Tian stopped him and handed him a rare medicinal compound. The medicine was a powerful regenerative elixir. It was the very same substance that had saved Zan Tian countless times on the battlefield after he had been separated from his sister 10 years earlier. The conversation soon took a darker turn. Zan Tian asked about Uncle Long's wife. The answer struck like a hammer. She had passed away 8 years ago, leaving Long Duong to raise his daughter alone. Zan Tian's expression hardened. A heavy sadness settled over the room as he processed the loss. Taking his sister's hand, he once again vowed to protect her at all costs. Anyone who dared harm her would die by his hand. His hatred for Puso, the man who had dared set his sights on someone under the protection of a god of war, burned fiercely. Revenge was no longer a question of if, only when. The following day, a plan was set in motion. Zan Tian and his sister would visit their aunt. Long Duong simply smiled and wished them success, maintaining his usual calm despite the storm that was rapidly approaching. An hour later, that storm arrived. A local gang burst through the fragile front door of the house. The leader, a red-haired thug, grabbed Long Duong by the throat and demanded payment of an outrageous debt. According to him, Long Duong owed 5 million yuan to Sky Eagle Company. Remaining completely composed, Long Duong demanded that Major Lao be summoned immediately to discuss the matter. The original debt had only been 100,000 yuan. Over 3 years, it had been criminally inflated into a completely absurd amount. Even so, Long Duong refused to be intimidated. Enraged by the challenge, the gang leader began beating the old man. The assault was interrupted by a ringing phone. It was Major Lao himself. Immediately changing his attitude, the thug answered in an overly respectful tone, reported his location, and confirmed that the boss was on his way. The moment the call ended, however, he doubled down on his threats. Long Duong calmly warned him that his arrogance would become very expensive once Major Lao arrived. The warning earned him a vicious slap across the face. Blinded by rage, the gang leader pulled out a machete and prepared to kill the old man on the spot. The attack was interrupted by a shout. Major Lao had arrived. The weapon was quickly hidden away and replaced with a submissive smile as the thug rushed to greet his superior. Major Lao entered alongside several of his men. The red-haired subordinate immediately began reporting what he called the old man's insolence, accusing him of refusing to pay and demanding severe punishment. Before he could finish speaking, Major Lao slapped him across the face. The blow was so sudden that everyone froze. The subordinate was being punished for daring to mistreat that particular old man. The reason became obvious moments later. Major Lao sensed the terrifying aura surrounding Zan Tian and instantly turned pale. His own subordinates quickly realized the magnitude of their mistake. Panic spread through the group. They immediately pressured the red-haired thug, making it clear that an apology was now the only thing standing between them and an early grave. Still dazed from the slap, the gang leader struggled to comprehend the sudden reversal. Major Lao then handed Long Duong the debt contract. Without hesitation, he tore it to pieces as a gesture of goodwill. Noticing that the red-haired subordinate still had not apologized, Major Lao issued a direct order. When the man hesitated, Major Lao's own followers attacked him, forcing him to kneel before Long Duong. The old man showed no mercy. Carrying years of resentment and abuse, he unleashed a barrage of punches to the thug's face, making sure the debt was fully repaid. Once the score had been settled, the atmosphere shifted again. Major Lao presented a box containing 2 million yuan, disguising it as payment for the meal served the previous day. Long Duong was far too wise to be fooled. He immediately recognized it as an attempt to buy favor with the god of war and rejected the enormous sum. The moment Zan Tian's name was mentioned, Major Lao smiled and asked where the warrior could be found. Without hesitation, Long Duong gave him the address of their aunt's house. Even after being refused, Major Lao insisted on leaving at least 20,000 yuan behind as compensation for the damage caused to the property. Moments later, Zan Tian and his sister left the scene behind. When they arrived at their aunt's yard, the peaceful atmosphere was shattered by screams and cries. Two children were beating a young boy with a wooden stick. Outraged, Ashwan immediately stepped in. The bullies ran away laughing, throwing insults at the girl who stood behind Ashwan as they fled. Bruised and frightened, the boy looked toward the girl accompanying her and quietly asked for a lollipop. Intimidated by the presence of a stranger, the child quickly hid behind his sister for protection. Keeping her composure, Ashwan gently encouraged him to greet Zan Tian. The warrior's anger grew. He demanded to know why they were living under such oppression and where the boy's father was. His sister revealed a painful truth. Born with mental health challenges, the boy had been rejected by his own father, a cold-hearted man who abandoned the family in pursuit of status within a powerful bloodline. He had refused to provide support, financial assistance, or even basic care. Their aunt had spent years desperately searching for treatment, traveling from hospital to hospital across China. Despite all her efforts, her son's condition remained unchanged, forcing her into a life of endless sacrifice. Zan Tian remembered exactly why he despised his uncle. The man had always been shallow, obsessed with wealth and social standing. Abandoning his own flesh and blood for status was an unforgivable crime. When they entered their aunt's home, they found a place that was modest but well-maintained, a testament to the woman's relentless hard work. Their aunt was lying in bed reading a magazine. Ashwan initially panicked when she saw her resting, but quickly relaxed after learning that it was nothing more than a common cold. Then Zan Tian introduced himself. The impact was overwhelming. His aunt immediately sprang to her feet. Her eyes filled with tears as she recognized the nephew she had not seen in years. Words could barely contain her joy. As they talked, the story of the family's downfall gradually surfaced. After the demolition of her original property, their aunt had once owned 6 houses. One by one, they had been taken from her. While she devoted every penny and every moment of her life to caring for her son, her ex-husband acted like a predator, seizing property, documents, and assets for himself. Zan Tian felt his blood boil. The family's original estate sat on a historic site that was now worth well over 100 million yuan. That fortune had been stolen without remorse by a man who left his own family in poverty while enriching himself. Between coughing fits, their aunt revealed the full extent of the scheme. Working alongside the influential Pu family, her ex-husband had used forged documents to steal her real estate holdings and gain entry into the construction industry. What had once been the wealth of one of the city's most prosperous women was now generating income for the very criminals who had ruined her life. While calmly peeling an apple, Zan Tian interrupted her story. The parasite responsible would repay every single cent he had stolen. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A young man named Chang entered the room. Dressed impeccably and wearing glasses, he was greeted by their aunt as a young master of the Yang family. The moment he saw Zan Tian, he barely concealed his disdain, treating him like a directionless recent graduate. Zan Tian responded with complete silence. His only concern was handing the peeled apple to his aunt. The newcomer was effectively invisible to him. Irritated by being ignored, Chang decided to inflate his own importance. He proudly announced that he was a senior executive at Zhou Company and, in a condescending tone, offered Zan Tian an interview for a management position. According to Chang, the opportunity was priceless. His restaurant chain was on the verge of dominating the market, and dozens of candidates would kill for such a position. Hoping her nephew would secure a stable future, their aunt encouraged him to accept. Zan Tian refused with a simple gesture. He calmly stated that he was already satisfied with his current occupation. Chang laughed. The sound was dripping with arrogance and contempt. He mocked Zan Tian's work while continuing to boast about the superiority of his own business empire. The clash of egos was only beginning. Zan Tian remained completely unfazed. Ignoring every verbal jab, he focused on caring for his aunt, offering her water with a kindness that sharply contrasted with the tension filling the room. The peace did not last. Sayong, Chang's cousin, suddenly barged into the house. Terrified, their aunt immediately ordered him to leave, warning everyone about the man's predatory nature and his reputation for bullying the weak. Sayang ignored her completely. Once again, he demanded that she sell her cabin. Even after being firmly rejected and publicly embarrassed, he remained arrogant, mocking the family's poverty and the money spent on medical treatments. Everything reached a breaking point when Ashwan's younger brother tried to defend their home. The boy shouted at the intruder. Sayang responded without hesitation. A brutal strike sent the child crashing to the floor. The boy's cries echoed through the room. At the same time, their aunt was overcome by another violent coughing fit, too weak to intervene. The atmosphere changed instantly. Sensing the danger, Chang attempted to calm the situation and urged Zan Tian to act with restraint. Sayang's response was immediate. A sharp slap landed across Chang's face. He mocked him as worthless trash and ridiculed him for failing to pressure the family into selling the property. The air in the room grew heavy. In the blink of an eye, Zan Tian appeared right in front of Sayang. Still drunk on his own arrogance, the thug tried to intimidate the little pup, daring to stand in his way. With an icy gleam in his eyes, Zan Tian simply repeated his demand, forcing the aggressor to face the price of his offense. This was no longer a freshly graduated nobody. This was a predator about to tear its prey apart. With his pride wounded, the thug threw an awkward kick at Zan Tian, but smashed into the bed with full force instead, crying out in agony. Remaining perfectly calm, Zan Tian offered him a way out. Buy the boy's medicine and disappear. Sayang's answer was to pull out a knife. The aunt's desperate warning echoed through the room, but Zan Tian was faster. With a sharp movement, he disarmed the attacker and struck him with enough force to send him flying through the doorway. Even beaten and humiliated, Sayang tried to keep up appearances, threatening Zan Tian with the influence behind his name and promising retaliation through a phone call. Zan Tian responded with a dismissive wave of his hand that sent the thug flying once again, bouncing across the ground like a worthless object. Watching the scene unfold, Chang could barely breathe. The raw strength displayed by that man was beyond anything he had ever imagined, comparable to a force of nature. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Terrified, the aunt begged them to leave before Sayang returned with reinforcements. Unbothered, Zan Tian continued peeling his apple with surgical precision, dismissing Sayang's threat as if it were a trivial inconvenience. Stunned, Chang made one final attempt to warn him about the disaster that was coming, refusing to offer any support against the retaliation of the organization backing that thug. Sai was the face of unchecked violence, a fighting dog with dangerous connections, notorious for breaking the leg of a Han family knight during a past conflict. Ignoring Chang's mockery, Zan Tian handed the apple to the aunt and made a chilling promise. In exactly 3 days, the Shenglong group would return every cent, every profit, and the deed to the property. Chang laughed so hard he nearly choked, trying to explain that Shenglong was an untouchable giant backed by the Chen, Shangguan, and Pu families, with influence stretching across all of China. To him, Zan Tian's words sounded like nothing more than suicidal delusions. The argument was cut short by destruction. A brick smashed through the window and struck the boy directly in the forehead, sending him collapsing in a pool of blood. Chaos erupted. A Shuan rushed to help her brother while Zan Tian, wearing an expression that promised the end of worlds, turned toward the crowd surrounding the house. They were Sayang's men, roaring threats and demanding that he come down and die. Panicking, the aunt begged him not to surrender himself, but Ashwin, recognizing her brother's absolute authority, asked for only one thing: destroy that trash. Zan Tian obliged. In a movement that defied physics, he leaped through the shattered window and landed in the courtyard with the impact of a bomb, shaking the ground beneath him. Rising to his feet, he smiled at the crowd as if he were facing nothing more than a minor amusement. From among the gang emerged Sayang's older brother, a giant marked by a deep scar across one eye. The gang celebrated as though Zan Tian's death were guaranteed. Filled with the contempt of someone who believed himself invincible, the brute looked at Zan Tian and called him a useless bag of bones, completely unaware that he had just signed his own death warrant. Bao's arrogance was remarkable. He saw Zan Tian as nothing more than a distraction, a minor obstacle in his day. He had no idea that by stepping forward, he was sealing his own downfall. Meanwhile, Zan Tian maintained the icy calm of a predator, treating Sayang's men as nothing more than nuisances standing in his way. Blinded by rage and humiliation, Sayang shouted orders, convinced that fear had frozen Zan Tian in place. The first attack came quickly. A thug rushed in with a club, but Zan Tian answered with a precise kick to the temple, knocking him unconscious instantly. The fight escalated when Zan Tian stepped on a piece of wood lying on the ground. The force launched it perfectly into his hand. With deadly precision, he hurled it like a projectile, taking down 5 men at once and leaving them writhing in pain with shattered bones. Without changing expression, Zan Tian demanded to know who had thrown the brick that injured the child. Panic consumed Sayong, who frantically called Bao, begging him to deal with the madman immediately. Following orders to kill, the crowd surged forward from every direction. From above, the ant watched with her heart in her throat, unable to believe anyone could withstand such overwhelming numbers. Observing the massacre, Chang cursed himself for ever getting involved with people so dangerous. Zan Tian was a vortex of violence. When one attacker charged with a machete, he was met with a devastating punch to the solar plexus that made him spit blood and collapse. Weapons and numbers meant nothing. To Zan Tian, this horde was nothing more than dust waiting to be swept away. The encirclement tightened, but Zan Tian was a force of nature. With an acrobatic burst of movement, he slammed into the ground and unleashed a shockwave that swept through the attackers. A thug wielding a bat attempted a finishing blow, only to be knocked unconscious before he could react. When another attacker lunged from behind with a katana, Zan Tian caught the man's arm with surgical precision and used the blade itself to unleash an explosion of energy that sent the opponent crashing to the ground in a spray of blood. He landed flawlessly before Sai and Bao. The silence that followed was grave-like, broken only by the groans of thugs scattered among the rubble and smoke. Bao, once so arrogant, could barely process the reality before his eyes. Zan Tian repeated the question, his voice sounding like a final judgment. Who threw the brick? Panic broke Bao completely. In a display of pure cowardice, he pointed at Sai, identifying him as the one responsible. Sai immediately began stammering excuses, but Zan Tian had run out of patience. With a flick of his hand, he released a burst of energy that struck Sai's wrist with the force of lightning. When the thug raised his arm, terror consumed him. His hand had been completely obliterated. Shaking uncontrollably, Bao tried to beg for mercy, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding. The act was interrupted by the ringing of his phone. On the other end was a desperate ally waiting for an important meeting. Bao wept as the world of power and connections he had built crumbled before him, along with the discipline of his gang, all at the hands of a single man. The god of war was not merely fighting, he was dismantling the entire system. The call ended with a promise of violent intervention. Clinging to a shred of hope, Bao stood up with a smug smile and walked toward Zan Tian. He believed his boss's name would serve as a shield, offering a chance for peace. The response was a brutal punch that sent the man crashing to the ground. Unmoved, Zan Tian ordered him to deliver a clear message to his boss. When he arrived, the apology had better be made on his knees. As Zan Tian turned his back and headed toward his aunt's house, Bao lay in the dirt, swearing absolute revenge. Inside the house, panic reached a new level. Brother Chang identified Bao's boss as the cousin of the Tiandu hotel manager, a man protected by the powerful Chen family. The connection was undeniable and deadly. Crossing that group was equivalent to signing a death warrant. Trying to save both himself and the aunt, Chang launched into a frantic series of phone calls, cashing in every favor he could to negotiate a settlement. When the negotiations ended, Chang proudly announced the result. Peace would cost only a public humiliation. Zan Tian would need to kneel and apologize. While Chang confidently invited him to face the inevitable, the warrior calmly continued peeling his apple. He shattered Chang's confidence with a single sentence. The message sent to Bao was for Boss Come to be the one kneeling upon arrival. The silence that followed was absolute. To Chang, Zan Tian's audacity seemed like the fastest path to collective suicide. Cold sweat ran down Chang's face. Desperately trying to distance himself from the situation in front of the ant, he insisted that Zan Tian's behavior would get everyone killed. The excuse died in his throat when the door exploded open with a thunderous crash. Brother Kum, still carrying the humiliation of having his arm broken by Zan Tian in the past, stormed into the room with a thirst for revenge bordering on madness. Seeing his superior arrive, Bao smiled with the cruelty of someone convinced he had already won. He frantically pointed toward the corner of the room, mistakenly identifying the nervous Chang as the target. But Kum's attention was already fixed on the man calmly peeling an apple. Zan Tian did not even bother standing up. The mere sight of the man who had crushed him before triggered a visceral paralysis in Kum. The Tiandu hotel manager's blood ran cold. Completely unaware of the disaster unfolding around him, Bao continued spewing threats, expecting his patron to act as executioner. The response came fast and hard. Kum delivered a savage slap that sent Bao crashing to the floor. Before the fat man could process the betrayal, a heavy boot slammed into his mouth, silencing him. Kum's trembling voice echoed through the room as he acknowledged Zan Tian's authority and the fatal mistake of his own arrogance. The domino effect was immediate. Fear spread through the room like an infection. In a desperate act of self-preservation, Bao grabbed Siang by the hair and threw him at Zan Tian's feet, painting his brother as the sole culprit behind the entire disaster. The display of absolute power became complete when Bao and his entire group, stripped of every shred of dignity, dropped to their knees, extending cash and begging for mercy. The domination was absolute. Humiliated and defeated, the brothers emptied their pockets, leaving an envelope containing 10 million yen on the table, a sum that, to Brother Chang, represented an unimaginable fortune. Maintaining his composure, Zan Tian merely nodded, granting permission for the cowards to leave. At last, silence returned, replacing the echoes of violence. Under the evening lights, the family gathered for a meal. In a gesture of absolute loyalty, Zan Tian split the spoils into 2 equal portions of 5 million each for his father and aunt. Shocked, his aunt tried to refuse, but Zan Tian remained firm. That money was Xiaowang's ticket to proper treatment. Feeling both the weight of responsibility and the warmth of reconciliation, his adoptive father accepted the money and made a new promise. He would no longer be a man broken by the betrayal of former partners. With those funds, he would start a new business and repay the amount many times over in dollars within 3 years. Zan Tian felt proud of the old man's determination. The peace, however, was shattered by the ringing of his phone. A deep, arrogant voice filled the room from the other end of the line. It was Pushao. Surrounded by luxury, women, and a private pool, the villain wasted no time with formalities. His tone was a direct challenge, demanding that Zan Tian appear in person and answer for interfering with his business operations. The game was only beginning. The meeting was set for exactly noon. Driven by twisted curiosity and the kind of arrogance that made him shatter glasses in excitement, Pushao wanted to see this mosquito with his own eyes. His butler, confused and irritated, suggested more practical methods in ambush, kidnapping the sister, or simple brute force violence. But to Pushao, destroying a man like Zan Tian was a rare form of entertainment, something he had no intention of rushing. As the family tried to enjoy the peace of a late dinner, the reality of exploitation came knocking. The aunt's employer arrived, carrying her monthly paycheck. The meeting took place on the staircase. A fat man puffing on a cigarette with open contempt stood beside a tall woman in a pink dress who radiated pure disdain. The money count exposed the scam. $200 were missing. The explanation was immediate and cruel. The employee's illness was a cost the company was unwilling to absorb. The woman in the pink dress raised her voice hysterically, treating medical leave as an undeserved privilege. She demanded that the aunt accept the reduced amount or face immediate termination, mocking her insistence on following the law. Despite her physical weakness, the aunt stood her ground, refusing to accept either the humiliation or the illegal deduction. The confrontation reached its boiling point when an imposing figure emerged from the shadows behind the exploitative pair. The newcomer made no effort to hide his disgust for their behavior. He despised, with every fiber of his being, parasites who built fortunes by stealing the hard-earned bread of people forced to work just to survive. The tense atmosphere was interrupted by an unexpected arrival. Zan Tian, Ashuan, and Mr. Long appeared at the scene. The aunt's supervisor, an arrogant man, sneered the moment he recognized Mr. Long. With a dismissive gesture, he mocked Zan Tian's simple appearance and ordered him to get lost. The words, however, died on his lips. A blur shot out from the shadows. It was Brother Cum. Without saying a word, he delivered a vicious slap across the supervisor's face. Confusion instantly consumed the scene. Furious at the audacity, the woman in the pink dress screamed at Cum, defending her ally, only to receive an identical slap in return. The silence that followed was filled with shock. She had finally recognized Cum as one of the company's major shareholders, someone she had treated moments earlier as a distant subordinate. Cum showed no restraint. Furious over the wage-skimming scheme, he openly condemned the exploitation that had left employees in poverty, pointing out that the company's cleaning lady was earning barely half of what she had been promised. Turning toward Zan Tian with genuine respect, the shareholder waited for the verdict of the man he considered the true authority. Trembling, the supervisor tried to downplay the cruelty by calling it an isolated incident, but Zantian's answer was a devastating kick that sent him flying. The final decision was placed in the hands of the ant, the true victim of that corrupt system. The supervisor and the woman in the pink dress crawled to her feet, begging for mercy. Moved by compassion, she chose to forgive them under one strict condition: immediate restitution. Brother Cum, however, remained merciless. Given the severity of the embezzlement and the proven abuses, both of their careers were finished. There would be no institutional mercy, only the full weight of legal and professional consequences crashing down upon them. The supervisor and the woman collapsed into paralyzing terror. Far from that chaos, the story shifted to Mr. Wen and his daughter. While she spent her time painting, her father quietly analyzed the consequences of recent events. The atmosphere was tense. The alliance between the Wen and Chen families had been shattered, leaving behind an open wound caused by the young master's mutilation at the hotel. The shadows of the past continued to grow. With Shangguan Nalan's return from overseas and Chen Badao's imminent arrival, the Wen family found itself standing at the edge of an abyss. Their survival seemed to depend on an unlikely gamble. The young man responsible for all the recent turmoil. Absorbed in her phone, Wen Shu interrupted her father's thoughts and handed him the device, displaying a revealing image. Mr. Wen stared at the screen, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The young man was actually Chen Badao's son. His visit to the cemetery to avenge the desecration of his mother's grave suddenly made perfect sense. A satisfied smile appeared on Mr. Wen's face. He saw an incredible opportunity, a powerful ally capable of standing against Badao himself. The mood shifted, however, when the discussion turned to the young man's identity. Shu seemed bothered that Zan Tian had failed to recognize her at the hotel. They had grown up together, and 3 years ago, she had been the one who saved him. Hardened by experience, Mr. Wen tried to comfort her. A decade of hardship and warfare, during which the young man had been forced to abandon everything and everyone to gain his strength, was more than enough to explain such a lapse in memory. Noticing his daughter's discomfort and shyness, Mr. Wen chuckled mischievously and teased her about her unresolved feelings. He even suggested a few ways she could get closer to the young man. The reaction was immediate. Her face turned bright red, and Shu quickly shut down the conversation before fleeing the room, unable to face her father's blunt observations about her feelings. The reunion weighed heavily on her heart, becoming a double-edged sword that left her feeling uneasy. Meanwhile, the true center of the storm was the Chen family estate. Chenner, reduced to a broken shell after losing both legs, groaned under the care of doctors while Shangguan Nalan stood nearby with an icy expression. With trembling desperation, the young man begged for revenge, and those words became the final spark that shattered his mother's restraint. Consumed by violent rage, Shangguan hurled a vase to the floor, smashing it into countless pieces as she roared against Chen Badao. Bitterness had completely taken hold of her. In her eyes, her son's tragedy was the result of failing to act with overwhelming force from the very beginning. She blamed the Wen family for daring to choose an insignificant nerd instead of aligning themselves with the power of the Chen family. The door burst open, revealing the Chen family patriarch supported by his guards. The tension was immediate. The old man had not come to offer comfort, but to address the humiliation hanging over the family. He confronted Shangguan, accusing her of unforgivable negligence that had not only cost her son his legs, but had also attracted Zan Tian's relentless wrath. Having spent years dealing with her impulsive nature, the patriarch urged caution, warning that the Chen family lacked the strength to confront the enemy she had helped create. Exhausted by lectures and blinded by her own arrogance, Shangguan finally lost patience. In a sudden outburst, she slapped the patriarch across the face and knocked him to the ground. The shock was absolute. His order for the bodyguards to remove her died in the air as the men remained motionless, ignoring the command of their former leader. Smirking with contempt, Shangguan exposed the patriarch before everyone present. His authority, she claimed, was nothing more than a relic of the past, a powerless old nobleman she no longer respected. The next order was brutal. The guards seized the patriarch and held him in place while Shangguan unleashed her hatred. To her, the old man had become nothing more than an obstacle, an unwanted presence she had tolerated for far too long. Fueled by her son's injuries and the family's humiliation, her rage knew no limits. In one final attempt to assert his authority, the patriarch appealed to his position and warned that her recklessness would destroy everything. His words only accelerated the inevitable outcome. Shangguan did not hesitate. With a lethal motion, she drew a firearm and pressed the barrel against the old man's face. There's no turning back. The shot rang out without mercy. The patriarch collapsed, and with him disappeared the last trace of moderation within the Chen bloodline. When informed that Chen Lao would not return until the following week, Shangguan merely shrugged. He could enjoy his remaining days. As far as she was concerned, Zhan Tian was simply an obstacle that needed to be eliminated, and she was willing to burn down everything left of the family if necessary. While chaos boiled within the Chen mansion, a completely different atmosphere existed at the school entrance. Zhan Tian accompanied Ashuan, his protective older brother instincts as strong as ever. Fully aware of the relentless protection he offered, Ashuan smiled at his excessive concern, amused that the fearsome warrior still behaved like an overprotective guardian, despite being a grown man. With the confidence of someone who knew her brother better than anyone, she teased him about when he planned to introduce a future girlfriend. The question immediately left Zhan Tian blushing. A playful tap on her nose ended the exchange, sealing a brief moment of peace amid the endless storms surrounding them. The brief moment of peace was interrupted by the arrival of a vehicle. Tank, Zhan Tian's bodyguard, stepped out of the car with military precision. He introduced himself to Ashuan with proper respect, formally taking up his role as her new protector. As a sign of loyalty, and to mark their first meeting, he handed her a pink folder, symbolizing the beginning of a watch that would never sleep, day or night. Zhan Tian immediately smacked Tank across the head, correcting his overly formal attitude toward a family member. The shock snapped Tank back to reality. Changing his tone, he asked Ashuan to simply call him by his name, explaining that despite being only 25 years old, he looked much older than he actually was. His attempt to charm Ashuan earned him another slap, this time from the young woman herself, who mocked him for looking closer to 40. After dropping Ashuan off at school, they moved on to more important matters. Tank reported the purchase of a luxurious seaside mansion, a secure retreat where Zhan Tian could rest amid the chaos of his operations. The warrior smiled, finding the measure excessive, but Tank remained firm. His master's safety was his highest priority. While their journey continued, Eden's day took a different turn inside the school. A classmate intercepted her with an urgent message. Teacher Wen wanted to see her immediately. Eden complied and found Mrs. Wen waiting in her office. The teacher, a member of an influential family, had secured a position as a language instructor in Haidong and, after discovering Eden's family connection, had personally taken responsibility for looking after her. Eden's nervousness was obvious as the teacher observed her in silence. Eventually, the question came, where is Zhan Tian? Wakend, train Iderlongs. Caught off guard by the sudden interest in her brother's return, Eden hesitated. Sensing the awkwardness, Wen tried to disguise her curiosity and simply asked for an introduction. Eden, however, was quick to seize the opportunity. She teasingly suggested that the teacher's interest sounded more like a secret crush than simple curiosity. Imagining the possibility of having her beloved teacher as a sister-in-law, Eden continued pressing the issue while Wen struggled to balance her professional composure with her growing embarrassment. The tension in the office was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Song Cheng, the physical education teacher. His enthusiasm upon seeing Wen was anything but subtle. Sensing the awkward atmosphere, Eden attempted to leave, only to be called back by Wen, who hurriedly denied having any interest in her brother before ordering her out of the room. The moment the door closed, Chung revealed his true purpose. Producing 2 highly sought-after tickets for Passion Machine 7, he demanded that Wen go on a date with him. He was met with a cold rejection. The repeated refusals quickly fueled his anger, and through a mixture of jealousy and arrogance, he convinced himself that Zhan Tian was somehow responsible. Chung stormed out of the office, determined to vent his frustration on Eden's brother regardless of Wen's wishes. Meanwhile, tension continued to build in the school hallways. A classmate warned Eden that an ambush was waiting for her after classes. Saucy, the school tyrant, was preparing a confrontation. Unlike before, however, fear had no place in Eden's heart. She felt protected by her brother's presence, as though an unbreakable shield surrounded her. The confidence she displayed was absolute. Her friend, accustomed to the timid Eden of the past, could hardly believe the transformation. The girl now looked ready to face the end of the world without flinching. The scene shifted to the gymnasium, a luxurious sanctuary hidden within the school grounds. There, Kum and his brother lounged on expensive sofas, while attendants catered to their every whim. The luxury was more than a display of wealth, it was a statement of power. They had established a strict surveillance network to ensure that no one in the school dared lay a finger on Eden before the school day ended. Fear-enforced loyalty governed everything inside the gym. Kum, still haunted by the memory of his shattered arm, remained cautious. even putting out his cigarette out of respect for Zan Tian's authority. The routine was interrupted when Song Cheng entered the gym. Thrilled by what he saw as an opportunity to climb the social ladder, Chung attempted to strike up a conversation. He offered cigarettes and tried to win over the bodyguards, hoping to use their status to impress Wen. His efforts were met with nothing but contempt. Irritated by the teacher's arrogance, the leader of the bodyguards ordered him out of the gym, making it clear that their presence was not meant to serve petty personal ambitions. Outside the protection of the gym, however, the trap was already closing. Eden and her friend were lured into an ambush and quickly surrounded by a crowd led by Saucy. The self-proclaimed queen of the school was finally putting her revenge plan into motion. When Eden's friend tried to fight back with threats, she was immediately silenced by a harsh command. Wanting to protect her friend, Eden stepped forward and made herself the primary target. Impressed by the girl's newfound courage, Saucy suspected that Zan Tian's return was the source of her confidence. The truth, however, was even darker. Saucy was not the mastermind behind the attack. She was merely helping clear the path for someone else. The tension reached its peak when a figure suddenly emerged from the shadows behind Eden. Without hesitation, the attacker threw a sack over her head, cutting her off from the world as the final stage of the trap began. Saucy personally restrained Eden's friend while the kidnapping was carried out with chilling efficiency. Desperate, the girl sprinted back toward campus in search of help. She found the physical education teacher and pleaded with him, explaining that Eden had just been abducted in broad daylight. Her panic was met with hostility and contempt. To Cheng, the story sounded like nothing more than a poorly invented excuse to skip class. He dismissed the entire situation as nonsense and ultimately drove the terrified girl away, treating her desperate cries for help as a ridiculous inconvenience. The situation changed instantly when the elite team stationed inside the gym heard the commotion. The head of the bodyguards stormed toward the teacher and shoved him aside the moment he heard the victim's name, Zan Tian's sister. Terror swept through the room. The idea that someone had dared lay a hand on the war god's protected family member was the opening chapter of a massacre waiting to happen. Chung still tried to argue, questioning how a kidnapping could occur in broad daylight, but a vicious slap from Kum silenced him. Kum could barely control the fear trembling through his body as he imagined the consequences if Zan Tian discovered their failure. Under immediate orders, Eden's friend led the group to Saucy's hideout. The moment they spotted the girl responsible, casually smoking a cigarette while basking in the misery she had caused, all courtesy vanished. Kum gave no opportunity for explanations or negotiations. Driven by the desperation of a man fighting for his own survival, he launched himself directly at her, beginning the reckoning for the reckless act that had condemned everyone involved. Even cornered, the girl tried to maintain her arrogance, hurling insults at her attacker and threatening to call in her subordinates. The response was a sharp strike that sent her crashing to the ground. Dazed, Saucy expected her followers to step forward and defend her honor, but silence filled the area. Not a single person dared challenge the intruder. Then a whispered explanation of the man's identity shattered her world. In an instant, tyranny gave way to panic. She dropped to her knees and crawled forward, begging for forgiveness as the fear of a deadly punishment, losing her remaining hand, consumed her. Between sobs and trembling breaths, she confessed that the kidnapping had been orchestrated by her brother, Julie G. The name echoed like a death sentence. Recently promoted to the position of 8th brother in the local hierarchy, he was a newcomer whose confidence far exceeded his intelligence. The revelation that he had acted independently, driven by suicidal arrogance, only confirmed how serious the situation had become. The hunt began immediately. Every hideout, every alley, and every corner of the city fell under the relentless scrutiny of those now searching for Julie G. While the search network tightened around the kidnapper, Zan Tian and Tank arrived at their new domain, a breathtaking mansion perched atop a mountain. The estate offered panoramic views and an almost unnatural sense of peace, standing in stark contrast to the violence they had left behind. Zan Tian briefly considered putting down roots in a place like that, but the calm did not last long. With his usual efficiency, Hank presented several artifacts he had recovered. They had belonged to the Elder in Black, one of the last remnants of the fallen Black Heaven sect, an organization that had evolved into the shadowy force, now known as the Black Dragon Club. It seemed the past had no intention of leaving Zan Tian alone. Hank completed his report flawlessly, presenting formal attire worthy of a man of Zan Tian's status and earning his master's approval. Before departing for his confrontation with Pu Shao, Zan Tian also asked for an update regarding Jane, keeping his focus sharp as he prepared for the inevitable encounter. When they arrived at the plaza, the atmosphere of luxury and prestige was shattered by the aggressive entrance of Zan Tian's vehicle. The car cut through Pu Xiao's private grounds like a predator, completely ignoring the rules and etiquette of the local elite. Audible panic spread among those present. Security guards and sycophants immediately surrounded the vehicle, demanding that the driver step out and answer for such outrageous behavior. While threats flew from every direction, Zan Tian remained completely calm. Sitting inside the car, he casually ate a banana while watching the commotion through the window. After finishing his snack, he extended the peel toward one of the guards and casually instructed him to throw it away. The insult was enough to ignite the fury of Pu Xiao's men. Their voices rose as they prepared to drag the intruder out of the vehicle by force. Everything changed when one of the guards noticed a detail embroidered on Zan Tian's sleeve, the insignia of the Black Dragon Club. The man's blood ran cold. He remembered the stories whispered by his grandfather about that organization, a sect whose influence shaped nations and whose ambitions were fueled by rivers of blood. As the informed guard retreated in terror, his partner, completely unaware of the danger, continued barking orders. The response was immediate. A brutal slap sent the man crashing to the ground. Only then did the unfortunate guard realize that his stupidity had placed him face to face with the apocalypse. Terrified, he threw himself to his knees before the vehicle. He begged for forgiveness, swearing that he had no idea who these people were, and promising to accept any punishment as long as his life was spared. Maintaining his icy composure, Zan Tian merely smiled and told the man to make his request quickly. He would consider it. San stepped out of the vehicle with an imposing presence and questioned why the entrance was being blocked. Sweating nervously and unable to argue, the man immediately complied with every order. Under San's direction, the group was escorted toward Pu Xiao's residence. Upon arrival, they found a hallway packed with subordinates. One of the henchmen asked Pu Xiao how they should deal with the intruders. Instead of ordering violence, Pu Xiao smiled. Serve them tea. The men in suits eagerly praised Pu Xiao's elegance and authority, questioning whether strangers like these were even worthy of his attention. One subordinate suggested throwing the visitors to the dogs, which had been deliberately kept hungry for days. Pu Xiao refused. He had no desire to ruin the entertainment so quickly. After all, they were guests, and every visitor was a rare occasion worth enjoying. Noticing that only 2 men had come, Pu Xiao asked which one was Long Guiding's brother. San immediately identified himself. The direct answer amused the host. Pu Xiao shook his head and remarked that the young man was wasting both his talent and strength. He openly acknowledged the abilities of both visitors, but made it clear that San stood out, even if he was reckless. Rather than pursuing pointless conflicts, Pu Xiao suggested that San should have apologized and accepted a position working under him instead. Zan Tian cut through the conversation, telling everyone to stop talking so he could choose his tea in peace. Tank, clearly unimpressed by the limited selection on display, complained about the lack of variety. Since his superior valued tradition, he demanded that the entire tea collection be brought out immediately, without further delay. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Pu Xiao and his bodyguard reacted with visible surprise, while murmurs of shock spread through the crowd. The host, however, simply laughed, treating the moment like a bad joke and mocking those who seemed impressed by the visitors' keen observations. Master Ma stepped forward carrying a bottle in his hands, claiming to have the solution to San's problems. He lunged forward, attempting to force-feed him a medicinal herbal drink. San responded with icy calm. With a swift movement, he disarmed the attacker and slammed him to the ground. The impact exposed Ma's true worth. He was nothing more than an ordinary fighter. The scene infuriated Pu Xiao, who felt his authority being challenged. He issued an ultimatum to his men, demanding that San and his companion be captured within 30 seconds. The encirclement tightened, but the response came immediately. While San's ally sprang into action, dropping opponents one after another with overwhelming force, San himself remained composed, seemingly uninterested in the chaos around him. Walking calmly to the sofa, San poured himself a cup of tea. After taking a sip, he openly expressed his disdain. Pu Xiao attempted to defend the quality of the product, citing years of experience in the tea business, but San refused to stay silent. Speaking with absolute authority, he exposed the fraud. The tea being served was a cheap imitation. Its yellowish color was completely different from the vibrant green shade expected of the genuine premium variety. For anyone willing to listen, he explained the subtle floral sweetness and delicate notes that defined authentic tea. This low-cost product, grown too quickly and sold by clever merchants as something refined, was nothing but a scam. In his own ceremony, Pu Xiao had been publicly exposed, and the luxury he flaunted had been reduced to a humiliating spectacle. Pu Xiao's fury became impossible to hide. Embarrassed by the revelation, he turned his anger toward his own subordinates, cursing them as he attempted to serve a second round. San showed no mercy. With the same cutting calm, he dissected the second brew as well, pointing out its lack of aging, its lifeless color, and its poor balance between bitterness and sweetness. What had once been a symbol of prestige for Pu Xiao was quickly becoming a pathetic parody. The verbal exchange was interrupted by a loud crash. One of the henchmen was hurled into a wall, defeated effortlessly. Tank stepped forward from behind, dusting off his hands and casually admitting that he had not even used a third of his strength to defeat the group of fighters. Relaxing comfortably on the sofa, San maintained his sarcastic smile. He reminded Pu Xiao that he had expected to be welcomed with elite tea, yet everything he had received was second-rate trash. Then, in a gesture of pure mockery, San lightly patted Pu Xiao's cheek. The host immediately recoiled, furious at the disrespect. He reminded San that this was his territory and promised to make him experience real pain. Pu Xiao clapped his hands, signaling for a horde of armed agents to enter. Before the attack could begin, however, Ben Xiao burst into the room in desperation, trying to stop the confrontation. He begged Pu Xiao to back down, warning him that these guests were far from ordinary people. The warning earned him a brutal slap. Enraged by the hesitation and what he viewed as a lack of loyalty, Pu Xiao struck Ben Xiao across the face. Despite belonging to one of Haidong's influential families and claiming to know every important figure in the region, Pu Xiao dismissed the warning entirely. To him, San and his group were nothing more than insignificant worms. Consumed by arrogance, he even turned against his own followers, attacking anyone who hesitated or questioned his authority. His desire to prove that nobody stood above him had completely blinded him. Fueled by rage at the sight of his men frozen in place, Pu Xiao finally ordered the immediate execution of both visitors. Zan Tian remained completely unfazed, leaving the dirty work to Tank. With the grin of someone enjoying himself, Tank charged forward, scattering attackers as if they were disposable insects. Every punch was a verdict. Pu Xiao's so-called army was nothing more than garbage beneath his feet. Leaning back on the sofa, Pu Xiao struggled to maintain his composure. He mocked Zan Tian and insisted that his death was inevitable. Zan Tian, however, seemed interested only in criticizing the mediocre tea. In a cold voice, he suggested that Pu Xiao drink the rest of it before it was too late. 2 minutes later, the silence outside was broken. The doors opened, and Pu Xiao expected to see his victorious men returning. Instead, he witnessed devastation. Tank walked in alone, completely unharmed, leaving behind a trail of defeat. Shock spread across Pu Xiao's face. He could not comprehend how more than 100 men had been eliminated in the blink of an eye. Zan Tian gave a slight signal. Tank moved immediately, delivering a devastating kick that slammed into Pu Xiao. The atmosphere of mockery vanished, replaced by unbearable tension. Desperate to regain control through fear, Pu Xiao mentioned that Zan Tian's delay was preventing the rescue of his sister at school. Zan Tian's blood instantly boiled. The promises made by Daiki and Laohu had been broken. In that moment, concern for his family eclipsed everything else, becoming the center of his growing fury. Pu Xiao realized he had found his opponent's weak spot and decided to play his cruelest card. In front of everyone, he made a phone call and demanded that Zan Tian's sister be put on the line. But the voice that answered was not the one he expected. Daiki picked up, his voice heavy with emotion, confirming the unthinkable. There had been a highway accident, and Yuli had died tragically. The call ended, and the silence that followed carried the weight of a vengeance that was only beginning. Pu Xiao froze, unable to process the collapse of his plan. The tension in the air shattered when San stepped forward, slapped him hard across the face, and seized the phone. The voice on the other end delivered a dramatic twist. Ashwan was safe. She had been rescued and was no longer in danger. Pu Xiao staggered to his feet, trembling as he stared at San in pure terror. When he finally asked who this man really was, the answer came like a death sentence. San belonged to the feared Black Dragon. The revelation destroyed whatever authority Pu Xiao still possessed. Following San's orders, he was taken to the pier beneath the unforgiving glow of the setting sun. Kneeling by the water's edge, Pu Xiao begged for mercy, desperately trying to justify his crimes. If he had known the victim was connected to the Black Dragon, he never would have touched her. San refused to accept the excuse. The sheer cynicism of Pu Xiao's argument, the belief that ordinary families were acceptable targets for abuse, awakened a deep, and Long contained fury. San began hurling stones at him, each one carrying the strength of a warrior who had survived battlefields filled with 100,000 soldiers, a man who had walked over countless corpses to protect what remained of his people. A lifetime devoted to defense and sacrifice would not be stained by vermin who viewed power as a license to commit crimes. The stones struck Pu Xiao with brutal force, knocking him to the ground. Desperate, the villain made one final attempt to save himself. He offered the wealth and influence of the Pu family in exchange for his life. San remained unmoved, silently watching the collapse of a man who was finally realizing that his fortune meant nothing in the face of the justice he had brought upon himself. The tension at the pier reached its peak when the phone changed hands. As chaos unfolded by the sea, the scene shifted to the Pu family mansion, where Pu Xiaomu was celebrating his 60th birthday in grand fashion. The atmosphere was filled with flattery as guests competed for the patriarch's attention. The celebration was shattered when a messenger burst into the hall. Under the impatient command of Pu Xiaomu, the man revealed the news that left everyone frozen in shock. Young Master Xiao had been kidnapped. Maintaining the appearance of strategic calm, the patriarch refused to let panic spread through the event. With the cold mindset of a seasoned strategist, he chose not to respond with force. Instead, he opted for a display of power disguised as generosity. He handed over his Jingo, the ultimate symbol of the Pu family's authority and influence, to be delivered to the kidnappers. The guests applauded, impressed by the supposed generosity of a man who seemed to hold every door in the region under his control. Back at the pier, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Far removed from the pride and prestige of his family, Pu Xiao was completely panicked. He could hardly believe his father's naivete or perhaps his cynical calculation in offering only a symbol of status rather than a military response. Screaming into the phone, he desperately tried to make his father understand the severity of the situation. They were not dealing with ordinary criminals. They were facing people whose power surpassed even the emperor's own guards. In a frantic attempt to save himself, Pu Xiao openly rejected his father's authority and ordered him to surrender half of the family's wealth, including their most treasured heirlooms and the sacred jewels of the Pu dynasty. As the young master pleaded desperately for his life, the kidnappers' leader took the phone from his hand. On the other end, the negotiators suggested showing mercy and promised a valuable reward if the hostage was released. John rejected the offer immediately. To him, the father was blind for trying to buy back his only son with scraps. The retaliation was swift and brutal. Taking a katana handed to him by his trusted subordinate, Jean delivered a merciless strike, severing the hostage's arm. A horrifying scream echoed across the waterfront, startling the seagulls as the young man collapsed onto the ground. Without hesitation, Jean ordered his men to wrap the severed limb in cloth and send it back to its owner. Meanwhile, at a lavish banquet, the patriarch proudly entertained his guests, delivering a speech about how people of status resolve conflicts peacefully without resorting to violence. The atmosphere of triumph collapsed when the butler arrived with a terrifying message from the kidnappers, urgently demanding that the hall be cleared. The family leader refused to interrupt the celebration and insisted that the news be delivered in front of everyone. The guests assumed the criminals were sending some kind of gift to seal a peaceful resolution, but the insult against the organization had already crossed the point of forgiveness. When the butler opened the box delivered by a messenger, the entire hall froze in horror. Inside was Pu Xiao's severed arm. The old man recognized his son's limb instantly. Moments later, the patriarch's phone began to ring. On the other end, the kidnappers mocked his age and informed him that they would personally deliver the young master at noon for a final farewell. Consumed by rage, the old man crushed the phone in his bare hands and promised them a deadly reception. His allies immediately volunteered to hunt down those responsible, furious that anyone had dared cross such a line. On the other side of the city, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Inside a restaurant, Tank was devouring plate after plate of meat with monstrous appetite. Mr. Long and Ashuan joined the group at the table, still processing the fact that their enemies had been nothing more than ordinary men and that his daughter was finally safe. Mr. Long proposed a toast. San reassured his ally before raising his glass, while the women at the table watched Tank's endless eating and realized they were getting hungry themselves. Tank's enormous appetite came from military trauma. Years ago, he and 1,000 soldiers had become completely isolated on the frontier. Surrounded by a massive enemy force and cut off from supplies, they were forced to retreat to a makeshift base built from mud and timber. Tank gave away his own rations to feed the wounded and led the defense while starving for days. When Jean's reinforcements finally broke through the siege, only 20 men remained alive. Tank survived, but he left the battlefield carrying the crushing guilt of watching so many comrades die. The memory vanished when San suddenly smacked him across the face, interrupting the feast and sending a piece of meat flying. Annoyed by his subordinate's relaxed attitude after already clearing 20 plates by himself, San ordered him to resume training immediately the following week. Startled, Tank accepted the order and accidentally addressed him as Emperor. The slip immediately caught Uncle Long's attention. Panicked, Tank launched into a series of increasingly ridiculous excuses in an attempt to protect his master's true identity. Before long, the uncle connected the title to Emperor Jean, the feared war god and supreme commander. The following day, several allies gathered with the head of the Wang family to review all the intelligence that had been collected. Among them were Daiki and his brothers, whose connection to the matter was indirect but significant. The clan leader saw a golden opportunity. By eliminating the rival group, which consisted of only a few dozen men, and securing favor with the Pu family, he could elevate the Wang family into the upper ranks of the region's second-tier powers. With only 5 minutes remaining before the deadline, the targets had still not crossed the first security perimeter. To the henchmen, this meant the kidnappers had backed down out of fear. The Huang patriarch disagreed completely. Criminals bold enough to kidnap the Pu heir would never retreat so easily. His orders were clear. The moment they appeared, everyone was to proceed with extreme caution and prioritize the hostage's safety above all else. Meanwhile, San's vehicle became trapped in heavy traffic. Tank immediately grew suspicious, convinced the delay was part of an enemy plot. Distrustful of the old patriarch's intentions and unwilling to tolerate further delays, Jean cut through the problem and ordered a helicopter from the nearest military division to be dispatched immediately. At the same time, Tank complained that the entire situation would have been easier if they could simply travel on horseback. Back in the main office, the Pu family leader demanded updates. The butler, Wan Fakai, assured him that everything remained calm. His report drew laughter from a younger ally, who had already convinced himself that the kidnappers had fled out of pure cowardice. Far away from the unfolding crisis, Wen Shu and one of her friends stood on a sidewalk, frustrated by the massive traffic jam. Their weekend plans had been completely ruined after 4 major avenues were suddenly shut down. Growing irritated by the standstill, Wen considered continuing on foot to investigate the cause of the blockage. That was when Song Sheng appeared, calling out her name while showing off a bandage wrapped around his head. He immediately launched into a heroic story, claiming that he had fought off a gang of robbers in a park while protecting an elderly man. The truth was far less noble. He had been denied entry to a nightclub, started a fight with the staff, and ended up getting beaten badly by the security guards. The girls were suspicious from the moment he started talking, and wasted no time calling him a liar to his face. Exposed and irritated, Song Sheng tried to keep the 2 women there while Wen pulled her friend away, suggesting they go shopping instead. Song quickly informed them that the downtown district near the Pu family offices had been completely locked down and that most businesses were closed. Surprised that such a massive blockade would happen on a weekend, Wen questioned him about it. Song made a quick phone call to verify the situation. After confirming the lockdown, he confidently assured them that he could bypass the security perimeter through his connections with Ju and Fakai's men. According to him, he could have them at the main plaza within 30 minutes. Since their own car was stuck in traffic, he offered them a ride in his vehicle, which was parked only a short distance away. As Wen's friend considered the proposal, Wen glanced over her shoulder and froze. Standing near a vehicle alongside Tank was Zhang Tian. The moment he noticed the movement, he turned around. Without hesitation, Wen ran straight toward him and wrapped him in a tight embrace. She admitted that she had been searching for him for a long time with her sister's help and had never expected such a sudden reunion. While her friend watched the scene in complete confusion, Wen clung tightly to San. When she demanded an explanation for his years-long disappearance, he calmly explained that his unit had been deployed on a classified mission in an isolated border region. Wen vented her frustration, explaining how she had repeatedly tried to get information from her father, but had never received any answers. In the end, she had buried herself in her studies and eventually become a teacher. Determined, San assured her that he would settle every issue involving the Chen family. He reminded her that she had protected him in the past, and now it was his turn to ensure she lived an incredible life. The sight of his rival made Song Sheng grind his teeth. San barely acknowledged his existence and continued speaking with Wen, asking about her plans for the plaza. She explained that she simply wanted to relax and clear her mind, but the traffic had ruined everything. Song Sheng completely lost his patience and started shouting, but San ignored him entirely. With casual confidence, he informed the women that a helicopter was already on its way to get them out of the traffic jam. Wen's friend thought the claim was completely ridiculous. She immediately mocked San, accusing him of being an attention-seeking liar who invented absurd stories to impress women. According to her, there was no chance a helicopter would land in the middle of such chaos. Convinced she was right, she grabbed Wen's arm and tried pulling her toward Song Sheng's car, laughing as she insisted it was the only option that made any sense. Wen hesitated. She looked back over her shoulder, unable to take her eyes off San. Song Sheng continued mocking the situation, inviting the girls into his car while insisting that his rival could never compete with him. As Wen's friend tried dragging her away, San remained perfectly still. "Our ride is here," he said. At that exact moment, the thunderous roar of multiple helicopter rotors echoed through the downtown skyline. The girl tried to dismiss it, claiming helicopters were common in the area, but her confidence vanished when one of them began descending directly toward San. Song Sheng stood there with his mouth hanging open. The aircraft landed beside the group, and armed soldiers immediately disembarked. They snapped to attention, saluted, and addressed San as general. What had seemed like an outrageous bluff turned out to be the absolute truth. San extended his hand toward Wen and invited her aboard. Proudly, she accepted and called for her friend to join them. Embarrassed and deeply disappointed by Song Sheng's humiliation, her friend finally realized that this was far more than an ordinary charter flight. Far away, the Wang clan watched the fleet crossing the skies. At first, the henchmen assumed it was simply another wealthy businessman showing off and suggested ignoring it. Some even questioned why a national authority would ever visit such a small region. Their arrogance did not last long. The moment the Huang leader focused on the insignia displayed on the aircraft's banner, all color drained from his face. It was the official symbol of the Supreme General, the war god himself. In complete panic, the clan leader dropped to his knees and forced all of his men to do the same as the helicopters crossed the horizon. As soon as the fleet passed overhead, the Wang men quickly stood back up. When they realized the helicopters were heading directly toward the Shanglong group, the leader immediately decided to warn Old Man Pooh. The conclusion was obvious. The arrival of the commander would either bring the greatest glory imaginable or complete destruction. Any mistake involving an authority of that caliber would be fatal. At the Pooh headquarters, Pooh Xiaomu paid little attention to the locked-down streets below and instead watched the aircraft bearing the vermilion bird emblem. He was convinced that such military power would become the key to elevating his family to the very top. When Huang rushed over with an urgent warning, the patriarch initially attempted to postpone the discussion, assuming it was merely another update regarding his kidnapped son. As far as he was concerned, rescuing his heir could wait when compared to the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to earn the favor of the war god. Everything changed when Wang leaned in and whispered the truth. The emperor was personally involved in the Shanglong affair. Pooh froze. He immediately ordered complete silence from everyone around him and finally grasped the true gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, the aircraft dropped Wen and her friend off at their destination before departing. Wen wanted San to accompany them, but he declined, explaining that he still had unfinished business to handle. Accompanied by Tank, who was carrying the unconscious Pooh Xiao inside a heavy canvas sack, San headed straight toward the security checkpoint at the main building. They were stopped by guards demanding identification and authorization to enter. San simply told them to inform the patriarch that his son was waiting at the front gate. Since they did not recognize the intruders and no credentials were presented, the guards stood their ground and refused entry. The standoff at the gate did not last long. Growing impatient, Tank hurled the sack containing Pooh Xiao directly into the defenders, knocking the entire group down like bowling pins. With the path cleared, San gave the order to move forward, and they crossed the entrance without resistance. Meanwhile, at the top of the building, Pooh Xiaomu and Huang paced back and forth across the helipad. The war god's delay was making the patriarch increasingly anxious. While his subordinate insisted, he had seen the aircraft land in the plaza below. The calm atmosphere ended abruptly when a bloodied security guard burst onto the platform, shouting about an invasion of the complex. Annoyed by the interruption, Old Man Pooh grabbed the man by the collar and demanded to know where the emperor was. Coughing, the guard revealed the truth. The invaders were the kidnappers of the heir. Huang immediately realized what had happened. leadership had failed to notify the security teams about the target's arrival, triggering a full-scale confrontation. Eager to earn recognition, Juan dismissed the guard and volunteered to contain the invaders on the lower floors, allowing his superior to remain and receive the main delegation. The patriarch approved of the display of loyalty, leaving the lackey convinced that greater power in Haidong was now within reach. In the parking structure below, Pu Xiaomu spotted a familiar vehicle. It was Lu Yongtong, arriving in a hurry after hearing rumors that the nation's highest-ranking authority was visiting the city. Old man Pu smiled smugly, proud that he had managed to keep such a valuable trump card secret until the very last moment. Inside the building, the invaders continued their advance without slowing down. Tank knocked out yet another defender and complained about the amateur level of the local security forces. San calmed his companion, reminding him that these people were not elite battlefield soldiers. Hidden at the far end of a corridor, Wang witnessed the trail of unconscious bodies left behind. The moment San's eyes locked onto him, terror overwhelmed him so completely that he lost control and wet himself. Having no interest in insignificant targets, the pair walked right past him, leaving the man collapsed on his knees, relieved simply to still be alive. Leaving the coward behind, the duo reached the main conference room doors. Tank smashed the entrance open with a powerful impact, granting them access. Once inside, the giant questioned why they had spared the henchmen in the hallway. San laughed at the question, making it clear that someone frozen in absolute terror was nothing more than a harmless nuisance. He then ordered Tank to place the sack on the conference table and call the patriarch, giving him 5 minutes to provide an explanation. Tank obeyed and attempted to make contact. Meanwhile, atop the building, Pu Xiaomu was speaking with Lu Yongtong when his phone rang. On the other end, Juan reported that the situation appeared under control and that his men were close to capturing the intruders. The patriarch ordered the threat neutralized immediately before ending the call. Seeing the seriousness of the situation, Yongtong suggested that the old man focus on his family's crisis before receiving any guests. Pu Xiaomu immediately rejected the idea, declaring that welcoming the emperor was infinitely more important than any internal problem. The patriarch's cold indifference caught Yongtong's attention, making him realize just how little concern the old man had for his own family's safety. Back in the conference room, Tank reported that he had failed to reach the target. San smiled. The opportunity for negotiation had been wasted. Now the reckoning would be personal. As he gazed out the window, the leader changed his strategy. With a swift motion, the sack containing the Pu heir was thrown from the top of the skyscraper. It plunged in freefall before crashing onto the asphalt of a busy avenue below. The violent impact brought traffic to a halt and drew horrified pedestrians toward the body. High above, San gave the signal to leave. Shattering the glass wall, the two men used the large shards beneath their feet as makeshift platforms, leaping and sliding down the building's glass facade in a reckless and impossible descent. During the dangerous vertical journey, Tank grinned widely, reliving the adrenaline rush he had not felt since his days on the battlefield. The Pu family leader forced his way through the crowd and rushed toward the body lying on the pavement. With trembling hands, he opened the canvas covering and came face to face with his dead heir. The shock left him frozen. Even in the face of such a disaster, the patriarch's priority remained power. He immediately ordered a manhunt for the killer, fearing that the scandal would ruin the reception for the nation's highest authority and destroy the family's reputation. To the old man, business was worth more than blood. That was why he ordered his men to remove the corpse immediately and clean up the scene before the VIP guests arrived. The moment two henchmen grabbed the tarp, San and Tank came crashing down from the top of the building, landing directly in front of the entourage with tremendous force. Tank's reaction was immediate and brutal. He charged the men handling the corpse, hurling the first one through the air, smashing the second man's face with a vicious elbow strike, and slamming the last one into the pavement after ignoring his desperate pleas for mercy, leaving him bloodied and broken on the asphalt. San stepped forward and fixed his gaze on the patriarch, confirming that he was finally face to face with Pu Xiaomu. As frightened whispers spread through the crowd, the young man mocked the old leader's behavior, pointing out that any attempt at retaliation was meaningless, especially since the father himself had chosen to ignore his son's rescue when he still had the chance to save him. Consumed by rage and determined not to ruin the event in Haidong, the elderly patriarch tried to silence the intruders by offering them money to leave. San scoffed at the man's greed. Even after his son's death, he was still prioritizing his future and influence over grief. Then he delivered his final demand. 100 million. The outrageous amount left the old man stunned. Before negotiations could continue, one of the region's most influential magistrates aggressively stepped in, demanding that the two intruders immediately apologize to the patriarch and pay compensation for the insult. The atmosphere instantly turned hostile. San immediately realized that words were no longer going to solve anything. The veteran of the group, hoping to minimize the damage, warned the man who had inserted himself into the dispute that he should disappear immediately after taking the first punch. The deal eventually moved forward. Master Pu handed over the valuable Shanglong Platinum card to San. With confirmation that the account behind it supported the status of a wealthy elite, the transaction was completed. Before walking away, San delivered a direct warning. If the card failed, the settlement would become personal. Behind the scenes, the old man was already planning violent retaliation the moment his meeting with the sovereign concluded. His coldness was so extreme that even San's companion found it disturbing how easily the man ignored his own heir's death in exchange for influence and power. San could only laugh. The attitude reminded him of his own father. Part of him wished the old man were still alive, if only so he could drag him to his mother's grave and force him to kneel there begging for forgiveness. The pressure in the atmosphere became so overwhelming that it unsettled everyone nearby. As San exited the complex, his path crossed with Wen and her group. The young woman quickly realized that they were all heading to the same destination, the Emperor's event at the Music Plaza. Security at the venue was extremely strict, requiring proof of enormous wealth before granting access, which had delayed her group's plans. When asked where he had gone, San answered bluntly. He explained that he had already taken care of everything inside the main building. The statement was met with complete disbelief and dismissed as obvious fabrication. To make matters worse, a rival appeared and began throwing insults, accusing San of wasting money on appearances and empty displays of status. Ignoring the comments, San tossed the platinum card to the group and left the decision to enter entirely up to them. The hecklers immediately doubted that such a luxury invitation would ever be accepted. The rival's plan involving the supposedly fake card was nothing but a facade. Actually attempting to use it would only result in public embarrassment. Trying to save face, the man called one of Wang Fakai's contacts directly. San's ally immediately lost patience at the audacity of someone trying to elevate himself by challenging his superior. San intervened before things escalated. He considered it a complete waste of energy to bother with someone so insignificant and simply turned away. When the man finally managed to get through on the phone and ask for a favor, he was immediately chewed out on the other end for wasting their time. Back in the office, the mood was one of pure shock. A massive crater in the window clearly demonstrated the level of danger involved, making it obvious that this was not a place for amateurs. Disappointed after yet another failed attempt at social climbing, the young woman handed her friend a map, showing the route to Shanglong in case she changed her mind. Moments later, she took the initiative and grabbed San's companion by the arm, suggesting they visit a nearby restaurant. The gesture left her friend wondering why she had suddenly become so obsessed with San. In the end, realizing the card was useless where they stood, the friend decided to go along as well. The rival, left behind, seethed with resentment. Meanwhile, the Emperor's elite escort, positioned in armored vehicles, received a radio transmission informing them that the Supreme Leader had changed routes and was now heading toward a restaurant in Xiong. San's group arrived at the location, which happened to be the most luxurious and expensive hotel in the region. The young woman reassured everyone that the meal would be her treat as a celebration of their reunion. Without the slightest bit of restraint, San's companion proceeded to clear plate after plate of meat from the table, earning laughter from everyone because of his blunt and straightforward nature. Watching the scene unfold, the young woman remained fascinated by the many mysteries surrounding San. The conversation soon shifted toward the Emperor, the most revered figure in the nation and the ultimate idol of the population. The young woman was convinced that such a powerful authority would never personally visit Haidong, even though rumors of the visit had already spread throughout the city. San responded with simple logic. If the sovereign were truly on his way, the military would have already established a 50-kilometer security perimeter around the entire region. Without such a lockdown, the most likely visitors would be a few direct representatives rather than the ruler himself. The girl praised San's strategic insight, but could not hide her disappointment. She had hoped to see the legendary leader with her own eyes. Unable to shake her curiosity, she wondered what the Shanglong company was really planning if the entire visit had been nothing more than a carefully crafted bluff. At Shanglong headquarters, panic was setting in. The leadership's facade was starting to crumble, and the subordinates were questioning all the promises about the general's arrival. The guards informed the veteran that they had lost track of the imperial escort. Furious at the possibility of becoming a public laughingstock, the old man immediately ordered a full-scale search. Faced with the soldier's obvious inability to track down his own emperor, the boss exploded in a fit of violence, threatening the man's life. Even his trusted assistant wasn't spared, taking a slap across the face and being humiliated for his incompetence. Having become useless to the criminal organization, which was known for extreme methods like forcing people to jump from the 26th floor at gunpoint, the defeated employee dropped to his knees and begged for his life. Meanwhile, the rejected rival was drowning his sorrows in alcohol at home, emptying bottle after bottle. He blamed San for completely ruining his chances with the young woman. In the middle of his drunken misery, his phone rang. It was the same Shanglong associate who had humiliated and dismissed him just hours earlier. Sensing that the tables had turned, the man answered with a cynical grin, ready to trade information about San's whereabouts. San's photo appeared on the screen, and the rival recognized him instantly. A malicious smile spread across his face. He figured that if San had picked a fight with the wrong person from Shanglong, his fate was already sealed, clearing the way for the young woman to come running back into his arms. At the restaurant, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The young woman raised a toast, celebrating their reunion after so much time apart. Curious, she asked why San suddenly had such a free schedule. He explained that with the border situation completely stabilized and under control, he had finally been able to take some time off. Her friend pressed him about his future, pointing out that he couldn't stay on vacation forever, but the young woman quickly came to his defense. After years of fighting, she argued he deserved a break and still had family matters to deal with. The woman sighed, admitting that she had originally planned to offer him a job, but it was clear that he had other priorities. Suddenly, a hotel employee interrupted dinner with a message specifically for the young woman. His boss had already paid the bill and sent her an exclusive invitation to meet him in the VIP suite upstairs. It was the same wealthy suitor who had been trying to impress her for ages, using the opportunity to mock San's presence. While the man continued his arrogant remarks, San remained completely unfazed, focused solely on his meal. The young woman responded with open disdain. She took the card back, attached enough money to cover the meal, and sent a direct message telling the pest to stop embarrassing himself. Outraged that a proposal from an heir of the powerful Song family had been rejected, the employee tried to intimidate her, but he was immediately interrupted by a brutal punch from San's ally that left him bleeding on the spot. Lying on the floor, the man threatened to have them killed, but the young woman didn't even flinch, reminding him that San came from a prestigious military diplomatic background. San simply smiled and continued cutting his steak as if nothing had happened. The young woman's patience with that man's advances had run out a long time ago. Suddenly, the banquet hall doors were thrown open, and a crowd of suited thugs stormed inside. Leading them was a man wearing a gold suit who demanded to know who had beaten the employee. The injured waiter, practically foaming with rage, immediately pointed out the culprit. San's ally calmly admitted responsibility. The young woman stepped in at once, warning the leader of the intruders that even as a member of the influential Song family, he still needed to respect other people's territory, and that the employee had gotten exactly what he deserved for his disrespect. The man in the gold suit laughed off her warning and revealed that someone else was truly behind the confrontation. That's when the Chen family's heir stepped forward, treating the young woman with forced familiarity and insisting that she join him for drinks. She immediately shot him down, reminding him that the old marriage arrangement between the Chen and Wen families had already been cancelled and demanding that he stop this charade. Confident as the leader of the faction that controlled the Haidong region, the playboy reached out to grab her by force. He never got the chance. Before he could lay a finger on her, San delivered a vicious kick straight to the attacker's face, sending him crashing to the floor. Sprawled on the ground and foaming with rage, the heir was quickly shielded by his bodyguards, who were stunned by the unbelievable speed of San's attack. The injured man demanded to know the identity of the person who had dared to challenge him, but San answered with a voice full of menace, saying that he was exactly the kind of person the rival should never have provoked. The declaration only made the Chen clan heir laugh mockingly. He boasted that his family had absolute power to do whatever they wanted in that area, and ordered his men to beat San to death. The young woman's friend panicked as chaos erupted throughout the luxury hotel, shouting that everything happening was completely illegal. San, however, simply gave a cold smile and warned them that his real counterattack hadn't even begun yet. By that point, all the talk about laws and rules had completely exhausted San's patience. With no interest in further arguments, he ordered his ally to get the girls out of there immediately to keep them from getting hurt. The giant nodded without hesitation. He approached the women and apologized for the brutality. Holding them firmly, he forced a path through the crowd, tossing thugs aside like mosquitoes to ensure their escape. Seeing the group retreat, the Chen clan's subordinates moved to chase them, but the injured heir immediately called them off. He assumed the retreat was an act of desperation and mocked San, claiming the young man was sacrificing himself like some hero to protect the two women. At the mention of the word sacrifice, San let out a cold laugh and told him the truth. He had only sent the women away so that the rival's blood wouldn't splatter on them. The provocation struck the blonde heir's pride directly. He was genuinely impressed by San's audacity despite being surrounded. At his command, the first thug charged forward with a killing punch, shouting for San to say goodbye to his life. The attack was stopped in the most humiliating way possible. San blocked the powerful punch with a single finger. Shock spread through the room as everyone realized his combat level was that of a supreme master. Another thug, hoping to gain an advantage through dirty tactics, pulled a dagger from his pocket and rushed toward San, eager to test the blade against his opponent's body. Barehanded, San intercepted the strike and shattered the steel through sheer physical strength, proving that his body was tougher than metal itself. In the blink of an eye, his counterattack was relentless. One after another, the attackers crashed to the floor until the entire group had been neutralized, writhing in pain. Suddenly, the leader of the invaders realized he was completely alone. As San walked toward him, the coward backed away, trying to hide behind the Chen clan's name. He threatened that the family would never forget this insult and suggested they keep everything quiet. San wasn't interested in listening. He delivered a brutal slap across the playboy's face, mocking the questionable bloodline of a family that believed itself untouchable. The heir was stunned to discover that San knew far too much about his mother's dirty secrets. Desperate, he tried to bargain for his life, offering any bribe imaginable to save himself. San refused to listen. He gagged the man on the spot and kicked him away, sending him rolling across the floor. His fury was fueled by disgust toward that bloodline, whose fortune had been built upon the blood of innocent people. He knew monsters like them would never do any good. As the coward begged for mercy, a sudden click behind San caught his attention. Pure instinct made him dodge a projectile. The shot had come from Juan, Shanglong's associate, who had been waiting for an opportunity to turn the situation around. Seeing a chance to survive, the heir cried out for help. Juan aimed his gun at San's head and demanded that he release the young master in exchange for not pulling the trigger, motivated solely by the gratitude and future rewards of the Chen clan. San simply let out a mocking laugh. With a single ruthless stomp, he ended the heir's life on the spot, turning the playboy into a lifeless corpse. With a casual kick, he launched the body toward Juan, sarcastically responding to the rescue request. Juan was horrified by the sight of his ally's death, but hatred quickly took over. He decided he would kill San no matter what. At his command, dozens of heavily armed thugs stormed into the conference hall, surrounding San from every direction. Confident that superior numbers would guarantee a massacre, Juan burst into triumphant laughter. San glanced around, impressed by the sheer amount of heavy weaponry gathered in one place. It was clear evidence of a thriving black market operating throughout the region. Remaining completely calm, with a smile on his face, he gestured for them to open fire. Juan assumed the young man had a death wish and immediately gave the order. Before the first trigger could be pulled, shadows burst from the darkness at incredible speed. It was San's elite guard. Using high-level military tactics, the professional soldiers neutralized and eliminated the armed thugs within seconds, leaving Juan's entire force sprawled across the floor beneath tactical gear. Once the operation was complete, the troops lined up in formation and bowed in unison, apologizing to their emperor for arriving late. Demonstrating his magnanimity, San accepted their apology but imposed an immediate punishment: 10 days of intense and rigorous physical training for the entire unit. The troops thanked their supreme leader for his mercy. Juan, completely unable to accept reality, couldn't understand why they were calling the young man an emperor. He began screaming insults, calling San a lucky brat full of cheap tricks. The shouting didn't last long. A woman with long black hair and scarlet eyes suddenly appeared at full speed from the side, grabbing Juan by the throat and smashing him into the floor with a single devastating strike. Dressed in an elite military uniform, the young woman instantly changed her tone when she grabbed San's arm, sarcastically demanding to know why he had traveled to Haidong without her. Having no patience for explanations, San ordered the unit to clean up the scene and confiscate all black market weapons in the region. He left first, accompanied by the soldiers' respectful bows. Meanwhile, the girls and San's ally took shelter at Wen Su's residence. The giant continued cleaning out the pantry without the slightest concern, a sharp contrast to the girl's anxiety. Worried about the consequences of everything that had happened, Su picked up her phone to warn her father, while her friend tried contacting her grandfather. The burly soldier completely ignored the tense atmosphere and suggested that they calm down and have something to eat. Before Su's call could connect, her phone vibrated with San's name appearing on the screen. She answered immediately, desperate for news. Outside the complex, San assured her that the situation had been resolved. Relieved to hear that the worst was over, tears filled the young woman's eyes as she asked for the details of the confrontation. San chose to spare her the brutal truth, simply telling her that everything had ended well. In the middle of their conversation, muffled screams coming from a nearby patch of woods interrupted the call. San informed her that he needed to hang up and investigate. As he entered the vegetation, San appeared behind the attacker like a shadow, stopping the act in broad daylight. The man turned in shock, still covering the victim's mouth while she silently begged for help with her eyes. Completely calm, San gave the man a piece of advice. If he wanted even the slightest chance of survival, he should run and find the deepest, most isolated hiding place on the planet. Offended by the young man's audacity, the criminal immediately resorted to violence, throwing a full-power punch. San intercepted the strike by catching the man's fist with one hand, showing not the slightest effort, and expressing complete disappointment in the attack's weakness. San traced an imaginary X through the air and unleashed a devastating strike. The impact sent his opponent flying, spraying blood across the area. The quick victory left the young man disappointed, but before collapsing, the attacker launched one last surprise attack from his mouth. San casually dodged it. As he sank into the water, the defeated enemy swore revenge, shouting that the Lei clan's fighters would hunt him down. Instead of fear, the threat sounded like an irresistible invitation. Things had suddenly become interesting, and San decided to investigate further. Shortly afterward, he freed a hostage who had been tied up nearby. Through tears, the young woman thanked him for saving her life. San reassured her and asked whether he should contact her family. She immediately refused and instead demanded to be escorted to Shanglong Group headquarters. The mention of the corporate giant instantly caught San's attention. He could smell trouble brewing. When they arrived at the company building, the fighter attempted to leave, but the girl stopped him. Wanting to repay the favor, she revealed an important detail. She was the daughter of Liu Yongtong, one of the corporation's co-founders. The revelation caught San off guard, since he had always believed that Pushao ran the entire empire by himself. Far away, inside the executive offices, chaos reigned. Liu Yongtong was screaming at his subordinates, desperate over his daughter's disappearance. In the same room, Pushao displayed an infuriating level of calm, mockingly claiming that the young woman was perfectly safe. His cynical attitude practically exposed his involvement in the scheme. Pressured by his business partner, he flashed a sinister smile and assured everyone that he was a model citizen who would never dirty his own hands with something like that. Furious, the girl's father demanded the truth and swore to destroy anyone who dared lay a hand on Shin Shin. Completely unfazed by the man's desperation, Pushao ignored the threats and changed the subject by introducing his secret weapon to the meeting, the feared Lei Hu, a deadly combat master from the Lei clan. The blackmail had reached its limit. The villain demanded control of the company, forcing the hostage's father to give in, but the man stood firm and insisted on hearing his daughter's voice first. The rival leader ordered one of his subordinates to make the call, but the phone rang endlessly before dying in silence. The tense quiet was broken when the thug tried to brush off the failure by boasting about his own strength. In the very next second, the office doors burst open. The girl rushed into the room in tears and threw herself into her father's arms, leaving the enemies completely frozen in shock. To make matters even worse, San walked in right behind her, radiating confidence as he greeted the mastermind behind the plot with an ironic smile. The old man's face immediately turned pale as he realized his assassins had been completely wiped out. Overwhelmed with relief, the businessman promised the hero a massive reward and took the opportunity to laugh at his rival's stunned expression. Unable to swallow his pride, the villain snapped back that the war was far from over. Like a rabid dog, the enemy fighter launched a cowardly surprise attack directly at the girl. The rival boss was already celebrating victory, but San was faster. He threw himself in front of her and crushed the attack by smashing his fist into the aggressors. The impact was so violent that it sent the enemy flying across the room like a rag doll. Not missing the chance to mock him, the hero casually complimented the man's impressive little strength. Lying on the ground in shock, the fighter finally connected the dots and demanded to know what the monster standing before him had done to his brother. Pushao cut off the pointless conversation and ordered the brute to stop wasting time and finish the job. The warrior immediately accepted the command, overflowing with confidence, because he still hadn't used more than half of his hidden power. San found the arrogance amusing and informed him that his strength barely compared to that of an ordinary recruit. Furious at the humiliation, the fighter lunged forward, convinced he would crush the young man. The clash of fists echoed throughout the office. In a fraction of a second, San's punch completely overwhelmed his opponent, launching him straight into a glass cabinet and shattering it into pieces. Coughing up blood among the broken shards, the man stared in disbelief and questioned whether such overwhelming power represented the peak of internal energy. San merely sighed in boredom, disappointed that his opponents were nothing more than mediocre. The mafia boss watched everything unfold, frozen with terror. San calmly walked toward the trembling old man and slapped him hard across the face to bring him back to reality. Thrown onto the floor and unable to comprehend how he had lost everything, the villain found himself cornered. The young man pressed his boot against the wealthy man's face and demanded complete surrender. If he wanted his bloodline to survive, he would immediately transfer every share of the corporation. With no room left to negotiate under the crushing pressure of San's boot, the corrupt businessman gave in and signed the documents. The girl's father stood there in stunned silence as he watched his rival's empire get taken over so effortlessly. Examining the transfer agreement, San broke into a satisfied smile as he realized he had just acquired the perfect gift for his aunt. Humiliated, the defeated old man asked if he was finally allowed to leave. The protagonist honored his word and granted permission, but reminded him that he still needed the approval of the homeowners. The head of the Liu family made sure to give his rival a sarcastic farewell hug, mockingly assuring him that their business partnership would be unforgettable. The argument ended with the final blow. The Liu family leader ordered his assistant to send every incriminating file that had been collected over the years directly to the police. With no way out, the corrupt businessman collapsed to his knees, completely ruined. Time passed, and night arrived, bringing the operation to its conclusion. While the villain and his elite warrior were escorted to a police transport in handcuffs, the officers honored San with a Distinguished Citizen Medal. The young woman tearfully thanked him for rescuing her, and her father promised that the Liu Corporation would remain forever indebted to him, leaving its doors open for anything he might ever need. With a light smile, the hero bid farewell to his new allies. Back at his uncle's residence, the celebration took place around a table overflowing with food. The giant devoured everything in sight, while proudly bragging about escorting the girls to safety. San interrupted the boastful storytelling with a smack to the back of the glutton's head, amazed by the capacity of that bottomless stomach. The homeowner defended the young man's appetite with good humor, promising that nobody would ever go hungry under his roof. Taking advantage of the relaxed atmosphere, the protagonist asked about the new restaurant project. His friend explained that he had already found the perfect location, but was worried about leaving his younger brother alone after the grand opening. San immediately dismissed the concern, taking responsibility for housing and protecting the boy so that his ally could focus entirely on the business without distractions. After a pleasant dinner filled with laughter, San summoned the young men responsible for guarding the house. Although they had failed during their watch and expected no reward, the warrior insisted on compensating them for their loyalty, staying true to his own ironclad principles. In San's eyes, failure deserved punishment, while victory earned rewards. As their prize, he sent the young men to the western region of Siang, a brutal territory where they could test their limits and build a bright future. One of them warned that the area was controlled by a feared foreign cavalry force. That was when San calmly declared that his word was the highest law in that land. The impact of the revelation was immediate. Upon discovering the young man's true identity, the youths dropped to their knees before the celestial king and swore to serve him until death. Before they departed, their leader demanded absolute secrecy. With the order sealed, the group decided to resolve one small local issue before marching toward Siang. The scene shifted to a school in the city. Inside the teacher's lounge, Wensu handed San an invitation to the birthday celebration she would be sharing with her brother. With a calm smile, the young man promised he would attend. However, danger lurked in the hallways. Sun Cheng, The physical education teacher, obsessed with the young woman, knew he had no chance with her and decided to take revenge on San. To accomplish this, he recruited his sister, the school's rebellious student leader, who had already been tracking the target's movements while preparing an ambush. The conspiracy quickly crumbled into dust. San's new subordinates emerged like shadows behind the pair. The girl was seized by the throat before she could react. The teacher attempted to retreat, but the counterattack was merciless. Determined to ensure the Celestial King's safety, the protectors brutally crushed the two traitors, leaving them broken and battered on the floor. Satisfied that they had neutralized the threat before their journey, the young men considered the mission complete. Later that evening, inside the Sun family mansion, pure terror filled the atmosphere. Beside the bed, a desperate mother wept as she looked at her son, whose body had been left horribly disfigured from the beating. Unable to comprehend who would dare harm her heir, she cried uncontrollably while a man struggled to maintain his composure in the face of the disaster. The matriarch soon connected the dots and discovered that the attack on her son was linked to the violent conflict in the neighboring district. Outraged by the complete failure of the bodyguards, she began screaming at everyone in sight, only to be silenced by a slap from her husband. The man warned her that the people involved belonged to the Pooh clan, which was already collapsing after its leader's arrest, and suggested investigating the teacher's role in the situation. Horrified by what she saw as her husband's lack of action, the woman demanded that he behave like a father and defend the family's honor. Having no patience for her hysteria, the man simply ended the discussion. At that moment, a subordinate rushed in with an urgent message from the front gate. A young man had arrived demanding to see the heir and was claiming responsibility for the teacher's suffering. Consumed by rage, the mother stormed over to the employee and slapped him across the face. She was furious that he had wasted time delivering a message when he should have been breaking the intruder's bones. The man swallowed his frustration and lowered his head in silence. Outside, San led his group forward. Having no patience for formalities, he ordered the advance. Panic instantly erupted inside the mansion. Windows shattered as shadowy figures stormed the property, forcing the trembling family into a dark corner. The mother's panic turned into desperate screams as the inevitable siege closed in around them. The head of the household felt his body freeze when he sensed an overwhelming murderous aura. Suddenly, the front door was ripped off its hinges and sent flying, along with one of the security guards who had been standing behind it. Without even stepping fully inside, San single-handedly obliterated the guards. Shocked by the massacre, the patriarch hurriedly called his powerful ally, Chong Mi, warning him that a monster with a terrifying presence had invaded the estate. The reinforcements promised to arrive soon. Meanwhile, San calmly walked forward, mocking the family's weakness while a wall of thugs attempted to surround him. Two men stood out among the crowd of guards, a grim-faced elder and an enormous brute. The older man swore he would turn the invader's life into a living hell, while the giant cracked his knuckles and told the young man to start writing his will. Stepping on one of the defeated thugs, San sarcastically commented on the noisy welcome and ordered them to bring out the true leader of the household. The head of security charged forward at full speed, shouting his own name so his victim would know who was about to execute him. San casually dodged the attack and responded with a devastating backhand strike. The impact tore open the brute's face, drawing blood instantly. The guard tried to keep fighting, but his confidence had already turned to dust. San landed another brutal punch, openly mocking the man's leadership position. Watching his ally get completely overwhelmed, the elderly man attempted a cowardly sneak attack from behind. Without ceremony, the protagonist knocked him down with a single punch, sending the few remaining teeth in the attacker's mouth flying. Crying out in pain, the old man revealed that he was the Song family's chief butler, but San paid no attention. He struck the other side of the man's face and knocked him unconscious on the spot. Broken and battered, the two leaders crawled forward and dropped to their knees at San's feet, begging for mercy. Witnessing their superior's humiliation, the remaining guards fell into complete panic and abandoned their posts, scattering in every direction. With the situation fully under control, San cornered the security chief and began his interrogation, making it clear that cooperation was his only path to survival. The hero demanded to know who was really pulling the strings behind the Song family and whether, over the last 10 years, the estate had ever hosted elite warriors masters of bladed weapons or fighters known for surgical precision and incredible speed. Trembling uncontrollably, the employee swore that the Song clan was far too insignificant to attract legends of that caliber, and that they had never encountered assassins with such abilities. San carefully studied their reactions and realized they were telling the truth. That meant only one thing. The Song family had been involved in the conspiracy entirely on its own. With the matter settled, San was preparing to leave when a metallic flash suddenly cut through the air behind him. A sneak attack. Without the slightest effort, the young man smiled and caught the blade between two fingers. Turning around, he came face to face with the furious woman. Annoyed by her cowardly tactics, he disarmed her and tossed the sword onto the floor. The force of the movement sent the socialite flying backward, leaving her stunned. Trembling with rage, she pointed at the protagonist and accused him of being responsible for Kailun's miserable condition. San didn't even blink. He calmly admitted it. Consumed by hatred, the woman rushed forward, vowing to make his life a living hell in the city. All it took was a single deadly glance from San for the security chief to panic. The employee immediately slapped his own employer across the face and ordered her to shut up if she wanted to leave the place alive. Collapsed on the ground and foaming with rage, she swore she would skin the guard and his entire bloodline alive. Realizing the magnitude of the danger, the elderly butler and the security chief joined forces to beat some sense into the wealthy woman before her stupidity got everyone killed. Watching the absurd scene unfold, San concluded that a clan with a mother and son that foolish had absolutely no reason to continue existing. That was when the roar of an engine caught his attention. The head of the Song family was quietly trying to escape in his car, abandoning both his wife and his employees without a second thought. The coward sped down the road in desperation, struggling to understand how everything had fallen apart. Then San dropped from the sky. He landed directly on the hood of the vehicle, completely blocking the driver's view through the windshield. With an amused smile, the young man casually waved at the driver through the glass. Terrified by the realization that there was no escaping that monster, the businessman jumped out of the vehicle with both hands raised, desperately trying to start a conversation to save his own skin. At that very moment, the headlights of a military armored vehicle illuminated the road. Believing luck had finally returned to his side, the fleeing businessman ran toward the official vehicle, shouting his own name and demanding protection from the military attaché. While his corrupt ally humiliated himself by begging for help, San simply leaned against the car and watched the scene unfold, waiting to see how it would end. San grabbed the man by the back of the neck and made it crystal clear that nobody in the world could get him out of this mess. But the threatening atmosphere was interrupted by the ringing of a phone in the young man's pocket. On the other end of the line was his younger sister. He answered, listened to her message, and informed her that he was already on his way. Moments later, uniformed soldiers began disembarking from the military armored vehicle. Commander Chang Mi took charge and immediately demanded an explanation for the commotion. Desperate, Song Ming grabbed his ally by the arm, trembling with fear as he stuttered that an incredibly powerful man had nearly taken his life. The officer flexed his muscles, ready to tear apart the insolent fool who had dared challenge military authority. The businessman continued shouting, describing how the young man had invaded the mansion and wiped out the bodyguards, all while pointing toward the vehicle. However, when the commander looked, he saw absolutely nobody. The car was completely empty. The wealthy man froze in shock, unable to understand how his enemy had seemingly vanished into thin air. Far from there, excitement filled the city's central plaza. San walked calmly through the crowd while Ajuan held his hand, loudly complaining about how late he was. The young man quickly came up with an excuse, explaining that he had needed to take care of a few last-minute issues and had run into some old acquaintances along the way. He promised it wouldn't happen again. Without wasting any time, the girl dragged him into a clothing store. She reminded him that it was Teacher Wensu's birthday and that she needed a stunning dress for the celebration, as well as some new clothes to upgrade San's wardrobe. As they browsed through the selections, the protagonist noticed that one of the employees was discreetly keeping an eye on them. The worker panicked the moment he recognized the customer. He immediately ran into the manager's office with urgent information. The employee explained that, back when he worked at the Tiandu Hotel, he had witnessed that same young man single-handedly annihilate the security forces of the powerful Chen family. According to him, that very danger was now standing inside their store. The manager hesitated, but the employee, eager to curry favor with the elite, suggested notifying the Chen family immediately. Hoping to earn points with powerful people, the manager agreed to make the report. Completely unaware of the trap being prepared, Ajuan happily walked through the store with her arms full of shopping bags, followed by a satisfied San. An employee with ulterior motives guided them to a private room in the back under the pretense of finalizing the payment. The The moment they entered the isolated area, the young woman became suspicious. The store's checkout counter had never been hidden away like that before. The employee attempted to run his scam, claiming that the secluded room was reserved exclusively for VIP customers and that their total bill came to 10,000 yuan. Ajuan instantly saw through the scheme. She knew the clothes weren't worth anywhere near that amount and demanded an explanation. San remained calm, already accustomed to swindlers trying to corner him at every turn. The man continued playing the victim, insisting that he was merely an honest worker protecting valuable merchandise. Having no patience for the act, the young woman dropped the shopping bags, grabbed her brother's hand, and turned to leave, but their path was blocked by the manager and several thugs. With the clothes already packaged and the security tags removed, the store owner informed them that they wouldn't be leaving without paying. Ajuan immediately argued that nobody could be forced to buy something against their will. Laughing mockingly and using vulgar language, the owner ridiculed the girl's innocence. He made it clear that his store operated by its own rules and suggested they settle the matter privately. His arrogance came at a heavy price. Consumed by anger, San delivered a violent slap that cracked loudly across the old man's face. Dazed by the blow, the manager instantly changed his tone and demanded 10 million yuan in compensation for the insult, attempting to intimidate the young man. San stepped forward with a deadly stare, completely cornering the scammer. The wealthy owner began threatening them with life imprisonment, but after judging the pair by their simple clothing, he changed tactics and declared that they would be taken directly to the powerful Chen family. Hearing that name made Ajuan break into an amused smile. The next second, the showroom turned into a massacre. With a single overwhelming motion, San knocked out both the guards and the manager, sending them coughing up blood. After hurling the last security guard across the room, the hero humiliated the overweight manager, stating that a third-rate incompetent like him would never have any standing with the Chen clan and should never have involved himself in a war far beyond his level. Collapsed on the floor and trembling with fear, the manager whimpered that the police were already on their way and would make sure the siblings received the harshest punishment possible. San simply laughed at the worm's desperation. He coldly declared that only a handful of beings in the entire world had the right to judge him, and not a single one of them was an ordinary human.